The explosion hit before anyone heard it coming. 1 second, 12 soldiers were walking through a canyon in Kandahar. The next, fire, smoke, and the sound of men screaming. From the rooftop, their only sniper took a bullet through the shoulder and went down hard. The enemy was closing in, fast. Every soldier reached for a weapon. And then someone grabbed the rifle nobody expected her to touch. The woman they called the ammo girl. The woman nobody ever looked at twice. She climbed onto that rooftop, looked through the scope, and everything the unit thought they knew about her shattered like glass. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is where stories like this live, stories about the people everyone underestimated. Every week we bring you something that will keep you up at night, like this video. Share it, drop a comment below telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And don't touch that screen, because what happens next on that rooftop will change everything. The morning she almost died started the same way every morning started in Phobe Greystone. Coffee that tasted like motor oil. A sky the color of dirty concrete. And Corporal Maya Cross hauling 40 pounds of ammunition across a gravel yard while the sun hadn't even decided if it was going to show up or not. Cross, you got the 7.62 for 2nd Squad? Already loaded on the vehicle, Sergeant. What about the suppressor kit for Vance? Pouch 3, left side, wrapped in the green cloth so it doesn't rattle. A pause, like the sergeant was surprised she'd thought of it. He shouldn't have been. She always thought of it. That was the thing about being invisible. You had a lot of time to pay attention. Maya Cross was 26 years old, 5'6", and built like someone who'd spent years doing physical work nobody photographed. She had dark hair she kept pulled back tight, a jaw that didn't move much when she wasn't talking, and eyes that were a shade of brown so deep they looked almost black in low light. Nobody had ever called her beautiful inside Greystone. Nobody had ever called her much of anything, except useful. She was the unit's ammunition specialist, the resupply chain, the person who made sure every magazine was loaded, every belt was linked, every weapon was fed before a mission stepped off. The soldiers called her the ammo girl, not with cruelty exactly, more like indifference, the way you'd call the truck. She carried their bullets, they carried the guns, simple division of labor, clean lines. Except Maya Cross had a secret, and it had been eating a hole in her chest for 3 years. The briefing for Operation Nightfall came down at 0600 hours, delivered by Captain Lewis Hargrove in the cracked wall room they used for mission planning. A thin man with a red beard going gray at the edges, Hargrove had a voice like gravel sliding down a tin roof. He pointed at a satellite image taped to the wall. Patrol objective is Grid Kilo 7, approximately 11 kilometers southeast of this position. Intelligence suggests a weapons cache in the lower valley. Possible IED components. Possibly a forward staging point for the cell that hit 3rd Platoon last week. He tapped the image. We go in, we confirm, we document, we extract. This is not a direct action mission. We are not looking for a fight today. Master Sergeant Cole Vance, seated in the front row with his legs stretched out, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Something funny, Vance? Hargrove said. No, sir. Vance looked at the map. It's just that valley has 3 natural choke points and 2 elevated positions that cover the main approach. If somebody wanted to stage an ambush, they wouldn't have to try very hard. That's why you're going, Hargrove said flatly. Vance nodded once. He was 34, built like a man who'd been compressed by years of carrying heavy things in difficult places. Square head, short hair, a scar on his left eyebrow from a piece of shrapnel he never talked about. He was the best shooter Maya had ever watched work, and she'd watched some extraordinary shooters in her life. Not that anyone knew that about her. She was sitting in the back of the room, against the wall, beside the ammo crates she'd prepped the night before, listening, taking notes on the map coordinates so she'd know exactly what loadout to prepare. Nobody asked her opinion about the choke points. Nobody ever did. The patrol stepped off at 0730. 12 soldiers, 2 vehicles, 1 sniper with a Barrett M82 that Maya had cleaned the previous evening while Cole Vance was playing cards with 2nd Squad. She'd broken down the entire weapon, checked every moving part, retorqued the scope rings to spec, and reassembled it before he came back. He'd picked it up, slung it over his shoulder, and walked away without a word. She'd followed, carrying the ammunition. The vehicles dropped them at the valley mouth and pulled back to a holding position 2 kilometers north. From there, it was foot movement. Single file, point man 30 meters ahead, Vance and his spotter, Lieutenant Danny Rook, walking just behind third position in the column. Maya was near the back. Her job during patrol movement was to stay attached to the trailing element, maintain spacing, and make sure the emergency resupply bag stayed accessible. 40 magazines of 5.56, 12 of 7.62 for the M14 Danny Rook carried as secondary 4 fragmentation grenades, and the Barrett's specialty ammunition in padded cases that had to be kept level to prevent the cartridges from getting dented. She knew the weight of every item in that bag without thinking about it. The valley was ugly in the way Afghan terrain often was. Not dramatic, just relentlessly difficult. Loose shale underfoot that slid and clicked no matter how carefully you stepped. Walls of pale stone rising on both sides, cut with shadow even at mid-morning. The air smelled like dust and something chemical she'd never been able to identify and had stopped asking about. Staff Sergeant Briggs, walking just ahead of her in the column, glanced back. "You good back there, Cross?" "Good, Sergeant." "Don't fall behind. Last time you were 20 meters back before anyone noticed." She didn't answer that. Last time she'd fallen behind because she'd spotted a wire partially buried at the trail edge and stopped to mark it with a chemical light without breaking radio silence. She'd reported it on the net 30 seconds later. They'd cleared it with a controlled DEET. Saved the column. Nobody had mentioned it after. She adjusted the weight on her shoulders and kept walking. It happened at the second choke point. The first hint was wrong. Not an explosion, not gunfire, just a stillness. A bird that had been calling somewhere above the eastern wall went quiet. The point man, PFC Torres, raised a fist. Column stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed louder than they had to. Maya felt it before she understood it. That specific quality of silence that isn't natural silence. It's the silence of a lot of people being very quiet on purpose. Then the valley erupted. 3 devices detonated within half a second of each other. Pressure plates hidden under the shale, she'd understand later, positioned to bracket the column's likely halt point. The concussive pressure hit like being slapped by something the size of a building. She was thrown sideways into the stone wall, shoulder first, and went down hard on one knee. Smoke, dust so thick it turned the air white, screaming somewhere up front. Then the gunfire started. It came from the eastern wall, the western wall, and the slope at the valley's head. At least 3 separate firing positions, coordinated, disciplined, not the panicked spray of opportunity. Somebody had set this up, somebody who knew how a patrol would move through this terrain. "Contact left! Contact left! We have wounded! Torres is down! Get on the wall! Get on the wall! Somebody call for CAS!" Radio traffic exploded. Maya was already moving before her mind caught up, pressing into the stone, getting her sidearm up even though a 9mm was essentially useless at the distances involved. She looked for cover, found a broken section of low wall 20 meters to her right. Old, pre-war construction, stone stacked without mortar, and made for it in a low sprint. She slid behind the wall. Rounds sparked off the stone 2 feet above her head, took inventory in 3 seconds. She was behind cover. Her bag was intact. She wasn't hit. The firefight was developing on her left. She could hear Vance on the radio from somewhere elevated. Elevated. She looked up. There was a building. Half collapsed, maybe 30 meters north of her position, but the western exterior wall was intact and the rooftop was accessible via a section of fallen masonry that created something like a rough ramp. 4 meters of exposed ground to reach it. Vance was already up there. She could hear his rifle, the deep, compressed crack of the Barrett that was different from everything else, like someone hitting a steel drum with a sledgehammer. Once, twice, then nothing. Then a voice she didn't recognize screaming, "Vance is hit! Vance is down!" Maya Cross had been in Kandahar for 6 months. In those 6 months, she had been shot at 4 times, been in 2 vehicle rollovers, had a grenade land close enough to leave her ears ringing for 3 days, and had watched men she'd handed ammunition to not come home. She had never fired her weapon in combat. She had never been asked to. The Barrett M82 was lying on the rooftop beside Cole Vance, who was on his back with his hand pressed against his right shoulder and blood coming through his fingers in a way that meant the round had found the gap between his plate carrier and his collar. He was alive. He would stay alive if someone kept pressure on that wound and got him a medevac inside the next 30 minutes. But the rooftop was 40 feet up, and the only way to reach it was across 4 meters of open ground and up that makeshift ramp while the eastern wall was still producing fire. Danny Rook, Vance's spotter, was behind a vehicle wreck at the valley floor, working his radio with one hand and applying pressure to Torres with the other. He looked up at the rooftop and she could see the calculation on his face. The math that said someone needs to be up there and the math that said I can't leave Torres. Their eyes met. He shook his head. Not at her, just at the situation. Maya looked at the rooftop, at the Barrett lying there, at Vance's hand pressing uselessly against his own chest. She looked at the 4 meters of exposed ground. She thought about a lot of things in the next 2 seconds, and none of them were heroic. She thought about the angle of fire from the eastern wall and where the dead ground would be if she kept low. She thought about the ramp and whether the fallen masonry would hold. She thought about the fact that she was 5'6" and the Barrett weighed 25 pounds. And if she couldn't get her position set correctly on a rooftop while under fire, then picking it up would accomplish exactly nothing. She thought about her father. Then she stopped thinking and started moving. The 4 meters felt like 4 miles. She kept as low as she could, nearly crawling, her shoulder bag bouncing against her back, rounds impacting the stone around her in small eruptions of dust and chip. The noise was enormous. The Barrett ammunition rattled in its padded case. She hit the base of the ramp on her knees, grabbed the broken stone, and climbed. Her hands were bleeding by the time she got to the top. She didn't notice until later. Vance was on his back, still conscious, his face the specific gray-white of someone who was managing shock by sheer stubbornness. His eyes tracked to her when she came over the edge. Cross. His voice was surprisingly steady. "The hell are you doing up here?" "Taking your spot," she said, and she wasn't sure herself if she meant it until she heard herself say it. He stared at her. "You're the ammo girl." She was already moving to the rifle. "I know." "Cross, keep pressure on that, Sergeant." She didn't look at him. She was looking at the Barrett, assessing the position he'd set before he went down. He'd been prone behind the low parapet wall, bipod deployed, rifle oriented roughly 45 degrees to the eastern slope. There was a round in the chamber. She could see the breech wasn't locked back, which meant either he'd fired and there was still a round ready, or he hadn't loaded one yet. She pressed the safety to check. Loaded. Round in battery. She got down behind the rifle. The scope was a Leupold Mark IV, 16 power, first focal plane, mil-dot reticle. She knew this scope. She'd cleaned it. She knew the exact adjustment of the diopter because she'd reset it after Vance had bumped the ocular lens against his kit bag 2 days ago, and she'd fixed it without being asked. She looked through it. The eastern wall came into focus, and something happened inside her that she didn't have a clean word for. The shaking stopped. Not the gunfire. The gunfire was still continuous. The radio traffic was still a wall of noise. Vance was still breathing in heavy, controlled gasps behind her. All of that was still happening. But the shaking in her hands stopped. She'd been trained to call this the cold place, her father's term. The place you got to when everything external became data instead of noise. When the wind wasn't terrifying, but was instead just a value you had to account for. When the target wasn't a man with intentions, but was instead a problem to solve at a measured distance. She'd spent 3 years trying to forget she knew how to find that place. Apparently she hadn't forgotten. The eastern wall was approximately 340 meters away. She estimated by reference to landmarks she'd noted during the approach. Wind from the northwest at maybe 8 kilometers per hour, gusting occasionally. Elevation roughly level, slight downslope to the target positions. She could see muzzle flash at 2 positions, both behind natural stone protrusions that gave good cover but limited mobility. She settled on the left position first. Closer, cleaner angle. measured the distance in mills against a reference object she'd clocked during the approach, the corner of a stone structure on the valley floor, adjusted slightly. Breathe out. Half breath. Hold. Front position of reticle. Center mass. Account for wind. 2 mil right. 360 meters true. She pressed the trigger. The Barrett fired. The recoil was substantial. Even prone, even properly positioned, the rifle pushed back with authority that would have surprised anyone who wasn't ready for it. She was ready for it. She absorbed it, came back on target, worked the bolt. Semi-auto, no bolt work needed, the M82 cycled itself, and was already looking for the second position. The firing from the left position on the eastern wall stopped. She didn't think about what that meant. That was the cold place working. Later you could think about it. Not now. Second position, eastern wall, 290 meters. The muzzle flash was intermittent, someone who was disciplined, moving slightly after each shot. Harder. She waited. Watched the pattern. Identified the drift. There. She fired again. "Who is that on the roof?" The voice on the radio belonged to Sergeant Briggs, somewhere at the valley floor, and there was pure confusion in it. "Who the hell is shooting from Vance's position?" "That's Cross," Danny Rook said. His voice had a quality she'd never heard from him before. "That's the ammo specialist." A pause. "Cross doesn't shoot." "She does now." The firefight lasted 11 minutes from the first explosion to the last round fired. In that time, Maya Cross eliminated 4 confirmed firing positions from the rooftop, 2 on the eastern wall, 1 on the western wall that had been keeping Sergeant Briggs's element pinned behind their vehicle wreck, 1 at the valley head that had been providing cover fire for what appeared to be a planned flanking movement that never materialized because the man coordinating it was the 4th target. She wasn't counting while it happened. The cold place didn't count. It just worked. When the shooting stopped, it stopped the way firefights sometimes do, not with a clear ending, but with a gradual peeling away of sound, like the volume being turned down in stages. One position went quiet, then another, and then there were only the echoes bouncing between the stone walls, and then even those faded. Maya kept the rifle up for another 90 seconds, scanning. Old habit. Her father had drilled it into her so many times it was muscle memory. Don't come off the gun until the area is clear. Enemy contact isn't over just because you stop hearing the enemy. Then she let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere below her ribcage. Her hands started shaking again. The medevac for Vance and Torres was already inbound by the time she climbed back down. She'd relayed position reports via Vance's radio while she was on the roof. He'd walked her through the radio call procedure between labored breaths, which was either the most professional thing she'd ever witnessed or the most absurd. She wasn't sure. "You have to push the—" "I know how to push the button, Sergeant." He'd looked at her. "Who are you?" She hadn't answered that. On the valley floor, the soldiers who'd been in the fight looked at her the way soldiers look at something they don't have a category for. Not hostility, not admiration, not yet. Just recalibration. Like a program running a process that had been initiated but hadn't returned results yet. Sergeant Briggs came up to her. He was a solid, deliberate man who'd been in the Army for 12 years and rarely showed surprise. He showed it now. "Cross," he said, "those 4 positions." "Yes, Sergeant." "You took 4 positions from that roof. 3 on the eastern approach and 1 at the valley head. The western wall position was already suppressed by the time I reoriented. I only fired once in that direction, and I'm not certain of the effect." Briggs stared at her. "Where did you learn to do that?" A pause. The kind that costs something. "My father taught me," she said. She didn't say anything else. Briggs looked like he wanted to push it, and then the medevac rotor wash hit them both, and the conversation was over for the moment. She sat apart from the others during the wait for extraction. Danny Rook came and sat beside her after a while. He had Torres's blood on his sleeve and the specific hollow look of someone who'd spent adrenaline they didn't have to spend. "Vance is going to be okay," he said. "The round went through without hitting bone. He's going to be pissed off and uncomfortable for a few weeks, but he'll make it." "Good," Maya said. "Torres has a concussion and a broken arm from the blast. Going home." He paused. "Could have been worse. Would have been much worse if that flanking element had gotten around our left. She knew that. She'd seen the flanking element developing through the scope. The man at the valley head had been the coordinator. She'd identified it from his movement pattern and the way the other positions were keyed to his firing rhythm. She didn't explain that. There was no reason to. "Danny," she said, "how bad is it going to be when we get back?" He looked at her for a moment. Danny Rook was 29, narrow-faced, with the kind of eyes that processed information faster than he let on. She'd always thought he was smarter than he presented. "Bad," he said. "Because of what I did. Because of what you are." He said it carefully. "Or what it turns out you are, which is apparently not what any of us thought." He paused. "They're going to ask questions, Maya. Command is going to want to know how the ammo specialist managed to effectively suppress 4 enemy fighting positions with a sniper rifle under fire conditions." Another pause. "And they're going to want to know why you didn't tell anyone you could do that." The helicopter was visible now, a dark shape against the white sky, growing larger. Maya watched it come. "What are you going to tell them?" Rook asked. She thought about her father, about a morning 6 years ago when she'd walked out of a training facility in Colorado and told him she was done, that she wanted a different life, that she didn't want to be his soldier anymore. She thought about the phone call she'd gotten 8 months later. She thought about the name she'd stopped using after the funeral. "I don't know yet," she said. The helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and sound. The debrief at FOB Greystone happened in 3 stages. First stage was medical, mandatory, after any engagement involving casualties. A PA she'd never talked to asked her a series of questions about her physical status in a flat clinical voice, checked her hands where she'd cut them on the masonry, noted her elevated heart rate, and declared her fit for duty. Second stage was the immediate after-action with Captain Hargrove and Sergeant Briggs. Standard protocol. Sequence of events, firing positions, ammunition expenditure, personnel status. She gave it precisely and without elaboration. The Barrett had expended 6 rounds, 4 confirmed positions degraded, 2 positions confirmed destroyed, by which the Army meant the combatants in those positions were no longer a threat, a phrasing she'd always found carefully constructed. Hargrove listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for what felt like a long time. "Corporal Cross," he said, "you're listed as ammunition specialist, MOS 92-Foxtrot. Your qualification record shows basic rifle marksmanship, expert badge, last qualified 9 months ago." He looked up from the file. "Expert badge is a good score. It does not explain what happened on that roof today." "No, sir." "Can you explain it?" "I had prior training, sir." "Prior training." He repeated it like he was turning it over to look at the underside. "What kind of prior training prepares a supply specialist to engage multiple confirmed threats at 300 to 400 meters with a .50 caliber sniper platform under active fire conditions and achieve a 67% effective suppression rate?" She said nothing. Hargrove leaned forward slightly. "Corporal, I'm going to need more than that." "I understand, sir." She looked at the wall behind him. "I'd like to request that this conversation move to an appropriate classification level before I continue." Silence. Briggs, standing to her left, shifted his weight. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable in the way experienced officers' expressions sometimes were. Not blank, just controlled. "All right," he said slowly. "I'll make some calls." Third stage of the debrief never happened that night. She went back to her bunk in the women's quarters. 8 women in the FOB, 2 of them on the same rotation, the rest on different schedules. The room smelled like gun oil and boot polish, and the specific close smell of people who hadn't had a proper shower in too long. She lay on her bunk with her boots still on and stared at the ceiling. Her hands had stopped shaking about 2 hours ago. They did that sometimes, held together until the moment passed, then fell apart for a while, then came back together. She'd learned years ago not to fight it. The shaking was just the body catching up to what the mind had already processed. She thought about the Barrett lying on the roof beside Vance's blood. She thought about the way the cold place had come back like no time had passed at all. She thought about her father, Ethan Cross. And the way he used to say the gun doesn't know who's holding it, but you always have to know. She'd thought that was pretentious when she was 17. She'd thought it was complicated and unnecessary, and the kind of thing that old soldiers said to justify making their children into something they hadn't asked to be. She'd told him that once, with more cruelty than was necessary. He'd listened, he'd nodded, he hadn't argued. 6 months later, he was dead, and she'd spent the next 3 years trying to understand whether the guilt she carried was grief or something worse. You always have to know. She'd always known. That was the problem. Her phone, technically not supposed to be in use in the FOB, but everyone had one, showed 3 messages from Danny Rook. Command knows something's off. They're running a background check tonight. Vance is awake and asking who was on the roof. I didn't tell him yet. And then 10 minutes later, Maya. They found your name, your real name. She read the last message twice, set the phone down on the cot beside her, looked at the ceiling again. 3 years. She'd changed her name after the funeral using the legal process that was perfectly accessible and entirely unremarkable. Maya Cross had walked into a courthouse in Denver a different woman and walked out with the paperwork that let her disappear. She joined the military under Cross, and the military had taken her at face value because her scores were good, and her background check had come back clean on the name she was using. She thought that was enough. She thought that she could put 4,000 miles between herself and a rifle and be someone else. She'd thought a lot of things. Lying in that training facility in Colorado, watching her father write her name on a targeting chart for the last time. They found your name. The words sat in her chest like something swallowed wrong. Outside the window, a small square of dim plastic that wasn't really a window so much as a ventilation concession, the FOB was still running. Generators humming. Radio traffic from the ops center. Someone's boots on the gravel path. An ordinary night in an extraordinary place. And somewhere in a server in Virginia, a background check was running against a name she'd spent 3 years pretending wasn't hers. Maya Cross, born Maya Elise Varden, daughter of Ethan Varden, United States Army Special Forces, retired. Instructor, marksman, the man who had trained some of the deadliest military shooters of the past 3 decades, and who had died of a heart attack 18 months after his daughter walked out of his life and told him she wanted nothing to do with the world he'd built. Her eyes closed. The generator kept humming. And in the FOB Operations Center, Captain Lewis Hargrove was reading a file that made him sit back in his chair and press 2 fingers against his mouth and say nothing for a very long time. Because the file wasn't just about Maya Cross. It was about who had trained her, and more specifically, about one of Ethan Varden's other students, a name flagged 6 months ago by intelligence assets in the eastern provinces, connected to 3 separate attacks on coalition forces, known to be operating in the Nuristan corridor. A name that had appeared, coincidentally, in the preliminary intelligence assessment for the ambush at Kilo 7. Victor Orlov. Hargrove read the name again. He looked at Maya Cross's service file. He reached for his phone. Hargrove's phone call lasted 4 minutes. Maya knew this because she was lying on her bunk counting the seconds the way she used to count her breathing between shots. Not because she was tracking anything useful, but because her mind needed something to do with itself, or it would go somewhere she wasn't ready to go yet. She heard his voice through the thin wall of the ops center, not the words, just the cadence, clipped, controlled, with that particular quality of an officer choosing each word because someone important was on the other end of the line. 4 minutes, then silence, then boots on gravel, moving toward the quarters block. She sat up before the knock came. "Corporal Cross?" Hargrove's voice through the door. Not a question. "Sir?" "Get dressed. Bring your service record if you have a copy." A pause. "And whatever you think you're not going to tell me, decide now whether that's still the position you want to hold." She looked at her hands in the dark. They were steady. 5 minutes, sir," she said. She heard him walk away. The ops center at night was a different animal than during the day. Quieter in terms of foot traffic, louder in terms of concentration. 2 radio operators running concurrent nets, A signals specialist she didn't know monitoring a feed on a secondary screen. A map wall covered in acetate overlays marked in grease pencil. Hargrove had cleared everyone out of the planning room. When she came in, he was alone at the table with a manila folder and a laptop and a styrofoam cup of coffee that had clearly been there long enough to be irrelevant. He gestured at the chair across from him. She sat. He opened the folder, but didn't look at it. He looked at her. Maya Elise Varden, he said. The name landed differently than she expected. Not like a punch. More like the moment you realize you've been holding your breath for so long, you've forgotten what exhaling feels like. Yes, sir, she said. Daughter of Ethan Varden, retired Special Forces, instructor, SOCOM-affiliated marksmanship program, Bragg, and then Grey Rock Facility in Colorado. He tapped the folder. Your father's file is substantial, so is yours. The one you apparently thought you'd left behind. He paused. You competed nationally at 16, state champion at 17. You were formally enrolled in your father's advanced program at 18, which is 2 years earlier than they'd ever accepted a trainee. The assessment notes say you showed, and I'm quoting here, instinctive mechanical aptitude combined with an unusual capacity for emotional control under simulated stress conditions. He looked up. That's a very careful way of saying they'd never seen anything like you. Maya said nothing. Then at 21, you withdrew from the program, voluntarily. No incident report, no medical discharge. You just walked out. He closed the folder. And 18 months later, Ethan Varden died. And 6 months after that, Maya Varden ceased to exist, and Maya Cross appeared in a recruiting office in Denver with clean paperwork and a story about growing up in Wyoming. The room was very quiet. That's accurate, she said. Why? She'd prepared an answer. She'd been preparing it in some form for 3 years. She knew what the efficient version sounded like. Clean, functional, with enough emotional content to seem honest without being exposed. She'd rehearsed it. She didn't use it. Because I didn't want to be his daughter anymore, she said. And then he died. And I didn't know how to be anything else. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. That's not a military answer, he said. No, sir, it's not. He sat back, picked up the styrofoam cup, looked at the coffee, set it back down without drinking it. I'm not going to pretend I don't have some sympathy for the situation, but I have a significant problem, Corporal, and the sympathy doesn't make the problem go away. He turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was an intelligence brief. She recognized the format. She'd handled enough of them in resupply coordination to know the header structure. But the content stopped her. A photograph. Man in his late 40s, heavy-set through the shoulders, with the kind of face that didn't give anything away easily. Dark hair going gray. A scar on the left side of his jaw that ran from his earlobe to his chin. Beneath the photograph, a name. Victor Orloff. She felt something move through her that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite memory. It was older than both of those things. Something in the architecture of who she'd been before. You know him, Hargrove said. It wasn't a question. I know the name, she said carefully. From your father? Yes. Tell me. She pulled her eyes away from the photograph, looked at the table surface instead. Orlov came through the program about 12 years ago. He was an American, Eastern European, naturalized, with a military background I didn't know the details of. My father accepted him as a private student. That was unusual. The program was government-affiliated. Taking private students outside the formal structure wasn't standard. But your father did it. My father believed in what he was doing. He believed the skill had a moral dimension. That teaching someone to be a precise, disciplined shooter also taught them something about restraint, about the weight of what they were capable of. She paused. He thought Orlov needed that. He thought Orlov had potential that was going in a bad direction, and that the training would redirect it somehow. And did it? She looked at the photograph again. Apparently not permanently, she said. Hargrove was quiet for a moment. According to our intelligence, Orlov is operating in the eastern provinces. He's been positively attributed to at least 3 sniper engagements against coalition forces in the past 8 months. Effective range confirmed at over 900 meters on 2 of those engagements. He paused. The ambush today at Kilo 7. The preliminary assessment puts Orlov in the area. He's the one who shot Vance. That's the working assessment, yes. She sat with that for a second. Vance's blood on the rooftop. The specific sound of a precision round, different from the rifle fire of the fighters on the walls. She'd heard it, but hadn't registered it consciously at the time. Now she registered it. "What do you need from me, Captain?" she said. He leaned forward. "Right now? I need you to be honest with me about your capability level, not your father's assessment from 6 years ago, not what you think I want to hear, what you actually are." She thought about the rooftop, the way the cold place had come back, the 4 positions, 6 rounds. "I'm not current," she said. "I haven't fired a precision rifle in 3 years. My reading of the environmental conditions today was functional, but I was working from memory, not from recent experience. I made assumptions about the ammunition's performance that turned out to be correct, but that I couldn't have verified without current data." She stopped. "But the mechanics are still there, and I can get current fast. I always could." Hargrove nodded slowly, like he'd suspected the answer but needed to hear it said out loud. "We have a problem," he said, "that is about to become your problem, whether you want it or not. Command is going to want an explanation for today. When that explanation involves your background, they're going to have questions about why you enlisted under a modified identity." He held up a hand before she could speak. "I know it was legal. The name change was legal. The enlistment documentation was accurate to the name you were using. You didn't falsify anything. But the spirit of the thing..." He shook his head. "There are people up the chain who are going to see this as concealment, and they're going to want to make decisions about you based on that." "What kind of decisions?" "That's what I'm trying to manage." He closed the laptop. "I need time. And in exchange for that time, I need something from you." She waited. "I need you to work with Vance's element," he said. "Officially, as a temporary attachment while Vance is medevaced. You'll be assessed under controlled conditions by qualified personnel. Your capability level will be formally documented, and that documentation will go into your record as what it should have been when you enlisted." He paused. "It protects you. It also gives me something to present to Colonel Hatch when he calls, which he's going to do in approximately 8 hours. "And Orlov?" she said. Hargrove looked at her. "One thing at a time," he said, but the way he said it meant the other thing was coming. Well, she didn't sleep. She spent the hours before sunrise on the south side of the FOB, where a section of HESCO barrier had been arranged into something resembling a seating area, equipped with 2 plastic chairs and a cable spool someone had dragged out to use as a table. Nobody came out there at that hour. It was too cold and too dark, and too far from the heaters. She sat in one of the chairs with her knees up and her arms around them and let the dark just be dark for a while. Her father's voice came back in pieces, the way it always did when she was still enough. "Marksmanship isn't a talent. Talent is just the thing that makes the early work feel worth doing. What you're building is a skill set, and skill sets are neutral. They don't care what you do with them." She'd been 15 when he told her that. She'd thought he was trying to impress her. He was an impressive man, large, deliberate, with a laugh that came rarely but genuinely, and a silence that could fill a room. And she'd spent most of her adolescence either trying to impress him back or trying to prove she didn't need to. "The question you have to be able to answer," he'd said, "is not whether you can make the shot. It's whether you should. That second question is the harder one. That's the one that keeps you human." She'd thought that was a cliché when she was young. Standing on a rooftop with a dead man's rifle and 3 soldiers' lives depending on her ability to answer that second question in about 2 seconds flat. It hadn't seemed like a cliché then. She heard boots on the gravel and didn't turn around. "Figured you'd be out here," Danny Rook said. He folded himself into the other plastic chair with the particular economy of movement of someone who'd learned not to waste energy. He had a metal cup of something hot that steamed in the cold air. "You want some? It's terrible." "What is it?" "Allegedly tea. I think it's mostly hot water with ambition." She almost smiled. "I'm fine." He sat with her in the quiet for a minute. "They told me about the background check," he said. "Varden." "Cross," she said, reflexively. "Yeah." He turned the cup in his hands. "I'm not going to ask you about it. That's not... I don't need to know the personal details. He paused. I do need to ask you something else. Go ahead. On the roof today, when you picked up the rifle. He stopped, chose the next part carefully. Were you scared? She thought about it honestly. Not in the way you'd expect, she said. There was something that felt like relief, which sounds wrong. I know it sounds wrong, but it had been 3 years since I'd touched a precision rifle, and I'd spent those 3 years thinking that I'd lost the ability to do it cleanly, or that I'd find out I could still do it, but that it would mean something bad about me. She paused. And then I was up there, and the cold place just opened up, and it was like... She stopped. It was like the part of me I'd been running from was just quietly waiting. Rook was quiet for a moment. That's either very zen or very terrifying, he said. Possibly both. Another pause. The FOB generator hummed its constant note. Orlov, he said. You know him. She'd expected this. From my father's program, she said. 12 years ago. Then you know what he can do. I know what he could do 12 years ago, she said. My father was a thorough teacher. If Orlov applied himself... She stopped. He was 900 meters on Sergeant Holt's team 6 months ago? 940, measured after the fact by range calculation. 1 shot. Wind conditions that day were significant. Rook set his cup down on the cable spool. The assessment team said whoever made that shot had either extraordinary instinct or extraordinary training. Both, Maya said quietly. That's what my father gave him. Both. The cold sat between them. Hargrove's going to attach you to our element, Rook said. It wasn't a question. He told you? He told me to expect it. I'm acting element leader while Vance is out. He looked at her sideways. I need to know if you can actually work in the field, not just on a rooftop under emergency conditions with no choice. I mean sustained operations, movement, communication, coordinated fire. I can work, she said. You've never worked as a shooter before, not operationally. What you did today was improvised, I know. She looked at the dark. I'll need to train with your equipment, and I'll need a spotter who knows how to work with someone who's been out of the discipline for 3 years. I'll spot for you. She looked at him. You're the element leader, and you're the one who can hit something at 500 meters under fire, he said. We can figure out the org chart. I'd rather have us functional than correct. She held his gaze for a moment, then she nodded. Tomorrow, she said. After Hargrove's call with Hatch. Tomorrow, he agreed. He picked up his cup, stood, then paused. For what it's worth, he said, what you did today was... I don't have a word for it that doesn't sound like something from a movie, so I'll just say that Torres would have died, and probably Briggs, and probably me. He paused. I don't forget things like that. He walked back toward the quarters block. She sat in the cold until the sky started to go gray at the edges. Colonel David Hatch's call came at 0630, not 0800, as Hargrove had estimated, which told Maya that whatever Hatch had read in the overnight report had moved his schedule around. She was present for it, technically, seated in the planning room off-camera while Hargrove handled the video link. She could hear both sides through the open door. Hatch was a lean, sharp-voiced man whose rank had given him the particular kind of impatience that comes from being responsible for too many things simultaneously. I've read the incident report, he said, before Hargrove finished his opening. And I've read the background file on Corporal Cross. Walk me through the sequence. Hargrove walked him through it. Precise, clean, minimal editorializing. Silence on the other end when he finished. The name change was legal, Hatch said. Yes, sir. JAG confirms there's no actionable irregularity in her enlistment documents. The concealment of capability, however. Colonel, with respect, there's no regulatory requirement for enlisted personnel to disclose extracurricular marksmanship training. Her MOS qualification reflects her assigned role. She exceeded her MOS in a combat situation. That's not a disciplinary matter. That's a complication, Hatch said flatly. Because what she did yesterday is going to circulate. You know that. You can't have a supply specialist suppress 4 enemy positions with a precision rifle under those conditions and keep it quiet. I've already gotten 2 calls from people who heard it secondhand. A pause. Who else knows the extent of her background? My element leads. Rook knows. Vance will need to be briefed when he's stable. Keep it contained for now. Another pause. And the Orlov connection. Well, Cross confirms he was a student of her father's. No current relationship, no contact in years. Still, Hatch's voice shifted slightly. A recalibration. I'm going to want a formal capability assessment on record before anything else moves forward. If she's what this report suggests she is, I have options. If she's a one-time performance under pressure that won't replicate, she'll assess, Hargrove said. A pause. How confident are you in that? Confident enough to stake my credibility on it, sir. Another silence. The kind that meant a decision was being made. Give her 3 days, Hatch said. Full assessment under field conditions. If she passes qualification at the level I'm going to specify, I want her in Rook's element officially. And I want the paperwork restructured to reflect her actual capability, not her MOS assignment. He paused. And Lewis. Sir? The name. I don't care what she goes by, but I want it on record that we know who she is. No more operating in the gaps. Understood, sir. The call ended. Maya sat very still in the planning room with her hands flat on her knees. 3 days. What? The first assessment session happened that afternoon on the FOB's range facility. A modest setup, 200 meters of cleared ground backed by an earthen berm, with pop-up target systems at 100, 150, and 200. Not ideal for precision long-range work, but it was what they had. The range NCO, Sergeant First Class Devlin, was a compact, round-faced man with 20 years in and the specific economy of language that came from having repeated himself so many times he'd eliminated everything non-essential. He watched Maya pick up the M24 they'd assigned her, Vance's backup weapon, a bolt-action 7.62 with a Schmidt and Bender scope, and begin her pre-fire checks without being told. You know that platform? He said. I've cleaned this specific rifle 6 times, she said, running the bolt. Last detail, I noticed the firing pin spring has a slight fatigue pattern. It hasn't affected ignition, but it'll need replacement within the next 2,000 rounds. Devlin looked at her. Rook says you've been carrying ammo for 6 months, he said. Yes. And you've been maintaining the weapons. Somebody has to, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Prone at 200, he said. 10 rounds, standard qualification course. We'll see where we are. She went prone. Set the bipod. Checked the scope adjustment. The range was straightforward. No wind to speak of, flat light, good visibility. 200 meters was not a challenge for this weapon system in these conditions. That wasn't the point, and she knew it. The point was to establish a baseline, to see if her hands remembered, to see if the cold place was available outside of a life or death emergency or whether it required the stakes to activate. She settled in, found the position, let her breathing slow. The cold place opened without resistance. 10 rounds, 30 seconds between each to allow the range safety to log. She didn't rush and didn't hesitate. She pressed each trigger brake the same way, absorbed each recoil, came back on target, assessed, adjusted where necessary. When Devlin walked the target, he stood there for a long moment before he came back. He looked at her without expression. 8 inside the center ring, 1 half-inch outside, 1 flyer at about 4 o'clock, he said. The flyer's yours. Wind shifted on round 7, she said. I compensated late. There was no wind, Corporal. There was a crosswind component from the berm ventilation structure on my left, approximately 3 to 4 kilometers per hour. It was inconsistent. She paused. I compensated late. He stared at her. Do it again, he said. The second session was 2 days later, at a location outside the wire that Devlin and Rook had arranged with the local security element, a stretch of elevated terrain north of the FOB that offered natural distance and variable conditions. Wind. Elevation changes. Targets at 400, 600, and 800 meters. 800 meters with the M24 was at the outer edge of the weapon's reliable envelope in non-ideal conditions. Most shooters with the platform wouldn't attempt it in the field. Devlin set it up anyway. Rook was spotting with a Schmidt and Bender spotting scope and a data book he'd been keeping since the previous session. He'd been building her a firing solution database, not because she couldn't do the math herself, but because good spotter-shooter teams divided labor, and he was establishing how they'd divide it. He hadn't said much about what he'd seen in the first session, but she'd noticed him recalibrating. The way he handed things to her changed, less the automatic assistance you'd offer to someone who needed it, more the deliberate action of someone coordinating with an equal. Small thing. She noticed. At 800 meters, the target was barely visible, a silhouette steel plate, half size, swinging slightly on its mounting because the wind at that range had 20 more meters of valley to collect across. Wind's variable, Rook said, his eye to the spotting scope. Gusting 8 to 12 from the northwest. Density altitude is elevated from last session. I'm getting a calculated come up of 31.5 minutes up, Maya said. A pause. Yeah, he said. Wind call? I'd go 6 right, but the gusts are inconsistent. I'll go 5 and wait for a lull, she said. Safer to wait than to overcorrect. You might be waiting a while. That's fine. She was. It took 4 minutes for a lull that lasted long enough to be useful. She pressed the shot inside it, calling the trigger brake to Rook so he could watch impact. The steel plate rang across 800 meters of valley. Devlin, standing behind them, wrote something in his notebook. Neither of them said anything. The formal assessment results went to Hargrove by the end of day 3. Maya wasn't in the room when Hargrove read them. She was cleaning the M24 in the armory, her armory, the one she'd run for 6 months as the ammo specialist, when she heard him walk in. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Devlin's recommendation, he said, is that you be assessed at expert level with the M24 and equivalent precision platforms, with a note that your performance at extended range, beyond 600 meters, is what he calls operating outside standard qualification parameters, in a way that warrants higher classification. Hargrove paused. He also noted that you identified a firing pin spring fatigue issue in the backup M24 that his armor had missed. She kept her eyes on the bore brush she was running. It's a subtle wear pattern, she said. You have to know what to look for. Apparently. He leaned against the doorframe. Hatch approved the reclassification. You'll be formally attached to Rook's element as secondary shooter. Your MOS gets an additional identifier. He paused. The name situation. They're going to file it as administrative irregularity, not misconduct, largely because JAG says there's no case, but also because Hatch doesn't want the paperwork headache. She set down the bore brush. What about Orlov? She said. Hargrove was quiet for a moment. There's a new intelligence product, he said. Came in this morning. Orlov's been identified at a training camp in the Nuristan corridor, Eastern Mountains, approximately 60 kilometers from the Kilo 7 engagement area. He paused. He's not just operating. He's building something, training others. The assessment suggests he's been at this for a while. She turned to face him. Expanding, she said. That's one word for it. She thought about what her father had taught Orlov. Not just mechanics, strategy, patience, how to build a system, how to teach what you knew so it multiplied. Her father had given that to Orlov, believing it would make him better. Orlov had used it to become something else entirely. What does Command want to do about it? She said. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. That conversation, he said, is above my pay grade right now. But I want you to understand that your name, your real name, is going to come up in that conversation. Because of your father, because of what you know about how Orlov was trained. She held his gaze. And because I can hit what they need to hit, she said. He didn't deny it. Get some rest, he said. Rook's team has a routine patrol tomorrow. Nothing elevated. Use it. Get your feet under you. He left. She picked up the bore brush and kept cleaning. The armory smelled like solvent and carbon and metal. It was the smell she'd grown up with, in a different place and a different life. Her father's workshop had smelled the same, Same chemicals, same particular quality of silence that came from being surrounded by precision objects maintained with care. She'd hated that smell once. She didn't hate it now. She wasn't sure what she felt about it. She kept cleaning until the M24 was as clean as a rifle could be, and then she checked her sidearm, and then she checked the ammunition inventory, even though it wasn't her job anymore. Old habits. Outside, the FOB was settling into its night rhythm, and somewhere in the Nuristan Mountains, 60 kilometers east, a man her father had trusted was training a generation of fighters with the tools Ethan Varden had given him. She set the M24 back in its case, closed the latches. And somewhere in the back of her mind, in the part that had spent 3 years trying to be silent, something that felt like her father's voice said, "You always have to know." The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. She picked up the case and walked out of the armory. Behind her, the door swung shut on its pneumatic hinge, and the latch caught with a sound like a single clean trigger break, final and certain, in the empty room. The routine patrol the next morning was anything but. It started the way Hargrove had described: low risk, daylight hours, a sweep of the settlement grid 2 kilometers southwest of the FOB to conduct a census update and check in with the local elder network. The kind of mission that existed to maintain presence, build relationships, and remind everyone on both sides that the war had a human dimension that the firefight sometimes obscured. Maya was attached to Rook's element formally now. Her kit reflected it. She carried the M24 in a drag bag over her left shoulder in addition to the standard load, and the ammunition pouch configuration on her plate carrier had been reorganized to reflect her new dual role. She still had the resupply bag, because nobody had reassigned that responsibility yet, and she wasn't going to leave it undone. Old habit becoming new reality, running parallel tracks. Rook had looked at the resupply bag when she stepped out for the morning brief and hadn't said anything, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. The element was 7 people. Rook as lead, Maya as secondary shooter, 4 infantry soldiers from what remained of the patrol element after Torres's evacuation and Vance's medevac, and a combat interpreter named Khalid, who had the particular exhausted patience of someone who'd been translating other people's wars for 8 years. They moved out at 0730 in a wedge formation, morning light flat and white, the FOB shrinking behind them. The settlement visit went smoothly for the first 2 hours. Tea with the elder, a man named Farid, who had intelligent eyes and the specific careful neutrality of someone who'd survived multiple changes of power by being genuinely useful to whoever held it. He told Khalid that things had been quiet. He told Khalid his cousin in the Eastern District had seen unusual vehicle movement 3 days ago on the mountain road. He told Khalid the price of fuel had gone up again. Rook logged all of it. The vehicle movement piece he flagged mentally, kept his expression neutral, moved the conversation forward. On the way back, at the 1 kilometer mark from the FOB, Specialist Chen, walking point, raised a fist. Column stopped. Maya's hand was on the drag bag without thinking. "What do you have?" Rook said low. Movement. High ground. 2 o'clock. Something reflected. Everyone went still. Maya scanned the high ground. The slope to their northeast was mostly bare rock with scrub vegetation in the lower sections. At the ridgeline, maybe 450 meters up, there was a natural rock formation that created a shelf, good elevated position, covered approach from the reverse slope, clean line of sight down the draw they were walking. She saw the reflection 2 seconds after Chen called it. Brief, a half-second catch of light, gone. Optics. Someone with binoculars or a scope. "Observation post," she said quietly to Rook. "Or forward observer," he said. The difference mattered. An OP was watching. An FO was watching and calling in something else. "We need to move," Maya said. "We can't run. Running confirms we made them, and they'll hit us before we reach cover." "I'm not saying run." She was already unzipping the drag bag. "Move the element to the drainage ditch. 40 meters. You're 9 o'clock. Get everyone down. Give me 2 minutes." Rook looked at the ridgeline. Looked at her. "You can't range that from standing," he said. "I don't need to. I ranged it by reference when we walked out this morning. 453 meters, elevation plus 40, wind." She paused, reading the air without a meter, the old way. Wind is nothing right now. 453 clean. A beat. Do it, he said. Then into the radio quietly. Element move to the ditch. Deliberate pace, no rush. Crosses on overwatch. Maya was already going prone. The ground here was compressed gravel and flat rock, not ideal. She found a natural depression. Shallow, maybe 4 inches, but enough to give her a stable firing position without silhouetting. Got the bipod down. Got her eye behind the scope. 453 meters. The shelf was clearly visible at 16 power. There was someone there. She could see a partial outline, head and shoulders behind the rock formation. The glint of optics still occasionally visible as the observer shifted position. Watching the element move toward the ditch. Not good, she calculated. The partial outline gave her about 1/3 of a standard silhouette target to work with. Head visible, 1 shoulder, nothing below. At 453 meters, in good conditions, that was not a routine shot. It was a precise shot with a consequential margin of error. Her breathing slowed. She could hear Rook in her peripheral awareness, moving the element, keeping it smooth. The figure on the shelf had a radio. She could see it now. Something in his left hand pressed to his face, calling in the element's position. She had seconds. She pressed the trigger. The M24 fired. Through the scope, the figure disappeared behind the rock formation. Not the clean backward motion of a confirmed hit, but a fast drop, uncontrolled. Her read was shoulder, possibly upper chest. The way the drop moved, she kept the scope on the position. Nothing else moved. Rook, she said. Element is in the ditch? In the ditch, he confirmed. All 6. Stay there, 90 seconds. She waited. Watched. The ridgeline was still. Whatever the observer had been calling in, it had been interrupted, but she didn't know whether the interruption had come in time. 40 seconds in, she heard the sound of a vehicle engine from the far side of the ridge, moving away, not toward. She let out a breath. All right, she said. Let's move. Also, back at the FOB, Hargrove's face went through 3 different expressions in about 4 seconds when Rook's element report came in. He settled on the one that meant he was thinking faster than he was showing. Confirmed observation post? He said. Confirmed observer, Rook said. Unknown affiliation, unknown status. Cross-engaged at 453 meters, observer went down, vehicle on the far slope moved off before we could identify. Hargrove looked at Maya. You took a 400-meter shot in a non-permissive engagement context off a 15-second decision cycle, he said. He was on a radio, she said. He was calling in our position. You didn't know that for certain. I knew it for practical purposes. She met his eyes. The vehicle on the reverse slope didn't move off because they were bored. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. He didn't argue with it. What he did was pick up his phone and call someone, and Maya didn't hear that conversation. But 2 hours later, a vehicle arrived at the FOB gate with 2 men in civilian clothes who had military haircuts and the specific kind of eyes that came from doing work that didn't get written up in standard reports. They introduced themselves as Carver and Webb. Maya didn't ask for more. Talk. The briefing room felt smaller with Carver in it. He was the one who talked. Webb sat against the wall with a tablet and watched people in the specific way that meant he was building a picture and had been since before he walked in the door. Carver was medium height, early 40s, unremarkable looking in a way that felt deliberate. He had a file folder that Maya recognized as a subset of the intelligence product she'd seen on Hargrove's laptop 3 days ago. He opened it. Laid 3 photographs on the table. Orlov, the mountain camp, an aerial image of the Nuristan corridor with a red circle indicating a suspected position. Intelligence assessment as of 48 hours ago, he said, puts Viktor Orlov at this training facility. He tapped the aerial image. Elevation approximately 2,200 meters. Accessible by 2 vehicle routes, both of which we believe are watched. The facility has been active for at least 8 months. He paused. We now assess that the training program Orlov has been running has produced or is in the process of producing trained precision shooters for at least 3 active cells in the eastern provinces. The table was quiet. How many trainees? Rook said. Current estimate is 12 to 15. 12 to 15 people trained by a man who was trained by one of the best marksmanship instructors the Army ever produced, Rook said. It wasn't a question. That's the situation, Carver said. Webb, against the wall, was looking at Maya. She kept her eyes on the photographs. The observation post this morning, Hargrove said. Is that connected? Probably, Carver said. The vehicle movement the elder reported 3 days ago matches a pattern we've been tracking on the mountain route. We believe Orlov's network has been doing area reconnaissance for the past 2 weeks, scouting approach routes, mapping the FOB's patrol patterns. He paused. They know where you are. They know how you move. They were watching the patrol, Maya said. We believe so. She looked at the aerial image, the red circle, the terrain. What does command want to do? Rook said. Carver looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Maya. The mission objective is to neutralize the training facility and capture or eliminate Orlov, he said. It has been formally authorized at the appropriate level. He paused. The reason we're in this room specifically, with this element specifically, comes down to a capability question. He laid a fourth photograph on the table. Maya looked at it. It was a firing chart. Her father's. She recognized the format. Ethan Varden had developed his own notation system over 20 years of teaching, and it was specific enough to be identifiable even in a photocopy. This was a photocopy of a training record from the Grey Rock facility. It showed a progression graph for a student identified by code number, not name. But she knew the graph. She knew the shape of that learning curve. She'd watched it develop. Orlov's training record, Carver said, from the Grey Rock facility archive. My father's archive, she said. Yes. Carver's voice was careful without being gentle. You understand that record better than anyone currently available to us. You know his strengths, his tendencies, his training gaps. He paused. You also know the methodology he was taught, which means you understand how he'll approach a defensive position, how he'll identify firing points, how he'll manage a long-range engagement situation. You want me to profile him? She said. I want you to help us take him apart, Carver said. The room was quiet. Rook was looking at her. Hargrove was looking at the table. Webb was still looking at her from the wall, and his expression hadn't changed since he walked in. Maya looked at the training graph, at the progression. She remembered watching Orlov during the one overlap period when she'd been at Grey Rock and her father had been running his private sessions. She'd been 19. He'd been in his mid-30s, already a disciplined shooter with a foundation she'd recognized as solid, even from a distance. Her father had seen something in him. She'd seen it too. She'd just never known what name to put on it. When does the mission step off? She said. 72 hours, Carver said. Weather window and coordination with the local security element. We go in light, fast, and we need to be out before the network on the valley floor has time to react. He paused. There's a preparation requirement. 48 hours of mission-specific training for the element. For the element, Rook said, or for Cross specifically. Carver looked at him. Both, he said. Halt. The next 48 hours were the most concentrated work Maya had done since Grey Rock. Webb, it turned out, had a background that was more specific than his silence suggested. He'd run similar operations in 2 other theaters, and his approach to mission preparation was systematic in a way that she found familiar. The same structural thinking her father used when breaking down a new shooting problem. Start with the terrain, build up from there. They worked from the aerial imagery, the topographic maps, and a 3-dimensional terrain model that Webb had built in a mapping program on his laptop. The facility was on a natural shelf at 2,200 meters, backed against a rock face that provided concealment from above. 2 external guards at predictable rotation. Possible interior defenders, number unknown. The approach is the problem, Rook said on the first evening. They were hunched over the terrain model in the planning room. Rook, Maya, Webb, Carver, and Specialist Chen, who'd been added to the element for his comms proficiency. Both vehicle routes are watched. We go on foot, we're looking at an 8-hour movement at that elevation. We don't go in fast, Webb said. We go in before they expect movement. 18-hour approach, start at night, be in position before dawn. 18 hours at altitude in November, Chen said, with full combat load. Yes, Webb said. Chen looked at him. I was registering the difficulty, not objecting to the plan. I know, Webb said. I'm agreeing it's difficult. Maya was looking at the terrain model's approach routes, specifically a section of the Western Ridgeline that curved around the back of the facility in a way that the primary approach analysis had categorized as non-viable due to elevation and exposure. "What's the sightline from this ridgeline section?" she said, pointing. Webb looked. "That's the back route. Assessment said it's exposed for about 400 meters. Exposed to what?" "The guard positions on the facility's eastern corner." "At what range from those guard positions?" He looked at the model, calculated. 700, maybe 720. "That's not exposed," she said. That's observable. There's a difference." She traced the approach. "If we move that section in darkness with light discipline and the guards aren't doing active illumination, we're inside their effective observation range without being visible. And we come out above the facility on the western side, which gives us the reverse slope approach to the main position." Webb looked at the model for a long moment. Then he looked at Rook. "She's right," he said. It was the kind of statement that didn't have a lot of emotional content, just a fact being delivered cleanly. Rook nodded. "We build the approach around the western ridge." Well, the physical preparation was harder. Maya had been fit. 6 months of carrying heavy loads in difficult terrain maintained a baseline that was better than what most people managed in garrison. But altitude work was specific, and 2,200 meters was going to extract a price from everyone in the element regardless of their ground-level conditioning. Devlin ran them through a 3-session preparation that included loaded movement at the highest elevation accessible from the FOB, a ridge 2 kilometers north that topped out at around 1,600 meters. Not the same, but something. The second session, Maya hit a wall at the 2-hour mark. Not a catastrophic wall, just the specific feeling of her legs deciding they were done with the current arrangement and her lungs sending a message that the current oxygen contract was under renegotiation. She slowed, kept moving, but slower. Rook, beside her, didn't say anything, which was the right call. She worked through it. 20 minutes of grinding, ugly movement where every step was a separate conversation with her body. Then it opened up again. The second wind, or whatever the physiological reality behind that phrase was, and she was back. They didn't talk about it afterward. On the third session, the wall didn't come. The night before the mission, she sat with the M24 broken down in front of her on a clean cloth and went through every component the way her father had taught her, not checking for problems. The rifle was clean and correct. She'd verified that. Going through it the way a musician runs scales before a performance. Not because the music requires it, but because it puts the hands in the right relationship with the instrument. Rook came in at 2,200. He sat across from her, watched her work for a moment. "You're doing it from memory," he said. "I'm always doing it from memory." She set down the bolt assembly, picked up the barrel. "This is the kind of thing you can either do with your eyes closed, or you can't do well enough." He was quiet for a minute. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to either way." "Orlov," he said, "when you were at Grey Rock, what did you think of him?" She continued working. "I thought he was serious, disciplined, the kind of student who never missed a training day and took corrections without ego." She paused. "I thought my father was right to see potential in him. I also thought there was something underneath the discipline that my father was choosing not to examine." "What kind of something?" She set the barrel down, picked up the receiver. "My father believed that the training itself was the corrective," she said. "That if you taught someone properly, with precision, with patience, with the weight of responsibility built into every lesson, it would reshape whatever was underneath." She paused. "He was right about a lot of people. He reshaped a lot of people. But not Orlov. I don't know what Orlov was when he left. I don't know what happened in those 12 years. She assembled the bolt back into the receiver. What I know is that the man who shot Cole Vance from somewhere we couldn't identify, at a range that required extraordinary patience and preparation. That man is using everything my father gave him. He's just using it for different ends." Rook was quiet. "Does that change how you'll approach tomorrow?" he said. She looked at the assembled rifle. "I've been thinking about that since Hargrove showed me the photograph," she said, "and I keep coming back to something my father used to say, that the hardest thing about precision shooting isn't the mechanics. It's the decision architecture." The chain of decisions that leads to a trigger press, and all the decisions that happen between identification and action. What's your decision architecture for tomorrow? Rook said. She looked at him. Capture if possible, she said. Neutralize if not. Destroy the facility. She paused. In that order. Command's priority is the facility, he said. I know. Orlov's secondary. I know, she said again. But he built this with my father's tools. There's something he knows that we need more than we need him dead. Rook was quiet for a moment. You're going to have to be fast when the moment comes, he said. The decision. You're not going to have the luxury of processing it in real time. I know that too. You ready? She pressed the magazine into the rifle, seated it with her palm, checked the chamber. No, she said honestly, but I'll be ready when it matters. He nodded once. Get some sleep, he said. He walked out. She sat for a while with the assembled rifle across her knees, in the particular silence of a space that's waiting for something to happen to it. They stepped off at 0200, 6 people, full combat load. The element was Rook, Maya, Webb, Chen, and 2 infantry specialists named Garza and Petrov, who'd been briefed at the last possible moment per operational security requirements, and had taken the mission parameters with the professional equanimity of people who'd stopped being surprised by what they were asked to do. The night was cold in the way that high-altitude Afghan nights were cold. Not just temperature, but a specific quality of the air, thin and clean and utterly indifferent to human presence. They moved in a file. Light discipline was strict. No white light, no visible IR from ground-observable positions. Rook navigated by terrain feature and GPS with the screen cupped in his hands. Maya was third in the column, the M24 in the drag bag across her back, the weight of it familiar now in a way it hadn't been a week ago. The first 4 hours were uphill. Not dramatic uphill, nothing that required technical climbing or equipment. Just the sustained, grinding altitude gain of following a ridge that went up by increments small enough to feel manageable and large enough to accumulate into something that hit the legs and lungs in ways you didn't fully register until you stopped. Nobody talked. They didn't need to. At the 4-hour mark, Rook called a halt at a natural depression in the ridgeline, enough cover to sit below the skyline, enough space for 6 people to rest without bunching. 5 minutes. Water and food. The specific joyless nutrition of field rations eaten for fuel rather than pleasure. Maya ate without tasting anything. Checked her hands. Steady. The cold place was not open yet. It didn't work like that. It wasn't a switch she could throw voluntarily. But she could feel the potential of it, the way you can feel a held breath before it releases. 3 hours to the western approach section, Rook said, barely above a whisper. She nodded. Webb, across from her, was looking at the slope above them. Wind's picking up, he said, coming from the east. She'd noticed. How much? She said. Gusting, maybe 15 to 20 by the time we're in position. 15 to 20 was manageable. 25 became a conversation. She'd already been running the environmental adjustments in the back of her mind since they stepped off, updating the mental model as conditions changed. It was something she did automatically now, the way people track time without consciously watching a clock. We'll manage, she said. They moved on. The Western Ridge section was everything the terrain model had suggested, and harder in actual execution. 400 meters of traversal with no cover except darkness, the Eastern Guard positions at 700 meters to their right, the shelf of the facility visible below and ahead. The wind had come up to 18, gusting 22, which moved across the ridge in irregular surges that pushed at their balance and made each careful step a recalculation. They moved in a line at 2-meter spacing. Each person placed their feet in the footsteps of the person ahead, minimizing noise and dust displacement. Maya counted her steps, not obsessively, just as a grounding mechanism, giving her mind a small, clean task while the larger awareness monitored everything else. 200 steps. Halfway. The guard position below and east showed a single light source, a handheld torch, occasionally visible as the guard moved through his rotation. She watched it in her peripheral vision without turning her head. The light moved in a pattern, Regular enough to confirm it was a guard. Irregular enough to confirm the guard was not completely mechanical about it. Awake then. Alert enough. She adjusted her pace slightly, matching the rhythm of the light's movement without thinking about it consciously. Move when the light moved, so any sound was covered by the guard's own displacement noise. Old technique. Her father's. 320 steps. They were through. The reverse slope opened up, and suddenly there was ground below them. The facility's roof visible, the approach descent, the clean dark geometry of a position about to become a target. Rook found a firing position that the terrain model had identified and confirmed that it matched. A natural rock ledge 12 meters long, providing coverage in depth, with a clean line of sight to the facility's main entrance, the external guard positions, and the interior courtyard visible through the gate gap. Range to the facility, 480 meters. She settled the M24's bipod on the rock, found her position, got her eye behind the scope. The facility resolved in the pre-dawn gray. Stone construction, 2 stories in one section, single story elsewhere. A vehicle parked inside the courtyard. 2 external guards, as assessed. Interior lights in 1 second-story window. Rook was beside her with the spotting scope. 2 external guards confirmed, he said quietly. Interior light is 2nd floor east room. I see it. Webb's taking the entry team in on your signal. She'd been part of building that plan. Signal was a single radio click from her when the external guards were neutralized, which, in the mission plan, meant taken quietly by Garza and Petrov using the approach cover before Maya needed to fire at all. The precision element was her backup. Her primary job was what came after the entry. If Orlov was in that 2nd floor room, and if he reached a firing position, she was the answer to that problem. She looked at the 2nd floor window. The light behind it moved once. Someone was awake. Rook, she said, I see it. Someone's awake in there. Could be regular activity, could be a guard rotation. Could be he knows we're coming. Rook was quiet for a moment. The observer yesterday, he said. She'd been thinking the same thing. The observer from the patrol, the one she'd engaged on the ridgeline, whose vehicle had moved away before they could identify it. Unknown status. She hadn't confirmed a kill. She'd confirmed he'd gone down, but down wasn't the same as out, and if he'd made a radio call before she reached him. Webb, Rook said into the radio, hold the entry team. We may have a compromise situation. Webb's voice came back immediately. Copy. Holding. The 2nd floor light moved again, and then, slowly, in a way that was different from the casual movement of someone awake by routine, the light went out. Complete darkness in the window. He's moving, Maya said. She felt it before she saw it. The quality of the stillness in the facility changed. Both external guards had stopped their patrol movement. They were standing still, listening. Someone had warned them. Webb, Rook said, his voice sharp and flat. Contact likely. They may know we're here. Stand by for fast breach. Copy, standing by. Maya was already running the adjustments. Wind at the current conditions, range 480, elevation. The external guards were priorities 1 and 2 for the entry team, not for her. Her position made the angle on the guards awkward, and the entry team had better angles. Her priority was the upper floor, the window. For 20 seconds, nothing moved. Then the 2nd floor window opened, and a rifle barrel came out of it, not pointed at the entry team's approach, pointed up the ridge, pointed at her position. He knew exactly where she was. The Barrett at Kilo 7. 400 meters. The shape of that engagement, the angles. He'd reconstructed it. He'd understood what it meant, the geometry of the shot she'd taken from the rooftop. He'd worked backward from the geometry and built a picture, and then the observer on the ridge and the vehicle moving away. He'd known for 24 hours. She had maybe 2 seconds before that barrel found the range. Taking the shot, she said. She pressed the trigger. The M24 fired. The rifle barrel in the window moved. Not a clean drop, a sideways recoil, like it had been knocked from a grip rather than dropped. Not a confirmed hit. Possible wound, possible near miss affecting control. But the shot from the window didn't come. Entry, Rook said into the radio. Go, now, go. Below, the entry team moved. Garza and Petrov hit the external guards with precisely the kind of quiet violence that close-quarters discipline made possible when you had surprise and good training working together. One sound, brief and human, then nothing. The gate opened. Webb and Chen went through it. From the upper floor, a voice, speaking in Russian-accented English, directed upward, directed at the ridge, directed at her specifically. Varden's daughter. The words carried across the cold morning air with extraordinary clarity. I wondered when they'd send you. She kept her eye on the scope. The window was dark. He'd moved back from it, out of her angle. Inside, she could hear the entry team clearing rooms, the rapid, controlled sound of professionals moving through a confined space. He's inside, she said to Rook. Moving. He's going to try to come out the back. Webb, Rook said. Expect back egress. Copy. Webb's voice cut off. A crash, close range, the sound of something heavy making contact. Then, contact interior, second floor. Then a shot. From inside. Then silence, for 2 seconds that felt like 20. Then Webb's voice again, slightly ragged. Petrov's hit, shoulder, I've got him. Garza, second floor now. Maya kept the scope on the rear of the facility. A small courtyard backing against the rock face, accessible from a ground floor door she could see from this angle. If Orlov was moving back, that door was where he'd appear. She waited. The cold place was open now, fully and completely, the way it had been on the Kilo 7 rooftop. The world narrowed to what the scope showed her and the data running in the back of her mind. Ranged to the rear courtyard door, 510 meters. Wind gusting from the east, current gust pushing 18. Adjustment, 2 mils right, hold top of center mass, account for possible body armor. She waited. The door opened. He was bigger than the photograph, moving fast, efficient, heading for the far wall of the courtyard where a gap in the stone led to the slope. He had a rifle, compact, folding stock, and a bag over one shoulder. He was running. She tracked. Range reflex, wind call, breath. He hit the gap in the wall, went through it, and the angle was gone. She was up before the M24's recoil had finished. He went through the rear wall gap, heading north on the slope. I lost the angle. Rook was already on the radio. Webb, Garza, rear egress north side, suspect mobile, armed. Can you pursue? Negative, Webb said. Petrov needs care. I can't leave him. Garza's the only one. Garza, Rook said. On it, Garza said, breathless. Maya was looking at the topography. The north slope from the facility's rear courtyard went uphill into broken terrain before it crested and descended toward the valley below. If Orlov knew the terrain, and he did, he'd been here for months, he had 3 possible routes to cover. She looked at the highest of the 3. A natural saddle in the ridgeline, maybe 800 meters from her current position, elevation plus 60. If he moved fast and smart, he'd try to clear the saddle before daylight gave her a clean line. He'd be at that saddle in 6 minutes. She was already moving to a new position, 20 meters along the ledge to her right, where the angle opened up. What are you doing? Rook said. There's a saddle, 800 meters, bearing 045 from current position. She was prone again, bipod down, scanning. He'll try to clear it. That's a long shot in this wind. I know. Maya. I know, she said again. Give me the data. He was beside her with the spotting scope in under 3 seconds. 840, he said, working the range. Wind is gusting, inconsistent. I'm seeing 12 to 22 in alternating pattern, roughly 8-second cycle. She was building the solution. Elevation, dead on for an 840-meter shot with this ammunition, was a specific come-up she'd calculated from the data book. Wind. The 8-second cycle meant she had a window inside each cycle where the gust dropped, creating a brief period of relative calm. She'd press inside the calm. Give me the low points, she said. Watching the grass? Okay, there's a low at the 4-second and 7-second mark in the current cycle. Coming up on 4. She watched the saddle. Waited. Nothing. He's not at the saddle, Rook said. He will be. What if he took a different route? He didn't, she said. She couldn't explain why she was certain. Something about the training graph, the progression, the way her father had taught Orlov to think, high ground, defensible position, maximum information about what was behind you. Orlov wouldn't take a lower route because a lower route left him blind to pursuit. He was coming to the saddle. 40 seconds, 50. At 58 seconds, a figure appeared at the saddle. He was moving, but not sprinting, controlled movement, weapon up, clearing the saddle the way he'd been taught. The way her father had taught people to clear elevated terrain, never rush, never silhouette, use the rock on your left to break your outline. He was using the rock on his left. She adjusted 4 inches right where the rock ended. Low point in 3, Rook said. 2. She pressed the trigger inside the pause. The M24 bucked. Through the scope, she saw Orlov go down behind the saddle rock. Not the way a man goes down when he's hit clean, the way a man goes down when something has interrupted his legs below him. She kept the scope on the saddle. He didn't get up. For 8 seconds, nothing moved. Then a hand appeared at the edge of the saddle rock, not reaching for a weapon, just appearing. Palm out. The universal shape of something that didn't need translation. Rook, she said. Her voice was very flat. He's down and showing hands. Rook was already on the radio. Webb, Garza. Suspect is down at the saddle, bearing 045, 800 meters. He's showing surrender. I need someone at that position in the next 5 minutes before he decides to reconsider. He lowered the radio, looked at Maya. She still had her eye in the scope, watching the hand at the saddle rock. Still there, still open. You could have taken that shot clean, Rook said. Center mass at that range. You adjusted off center. She hadn't realized he'd seen it. Leg shot, she said. He goes down, he stays down. He can still answer questions. A pause. That's a harder shot, he said. I know. He looked at the saddle, the hand still visible. Your call, he said, or your father's. She thought about it honestly. I don't know, she said. Maybe both. The hand at the saddle didn't move. The wind came through again, cold and clean across the ridge, and for a moment the world was very quiet in the specific way it gets quiet after something significant has happened and everything is waiting to understand what it means. Garza's voice came across the radio. On approach to the saddle, 60 seconds. Maya lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking. She let them. Garza reached the saddle in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Maya knew because she counted. Not deliberately. The same automatic mechanism that had been counting since the first night patrol, since Kilo 7, since the first morning she'd walked into FOB Greystone carrying someone else's ammunition. Her mind kept time without being asked to. At the saddle, Garza's voice came across the radio. Suspect is down. Leg wound, left thigh, above the knee. He's conscious. He's not fighting. A pause that had something complicated in it. He's asking for cross, Garza said. Nobody said anything for a moment. Rook looked at her. She was already getting up. Was. The walk to the saddle took 11 minutes at altitude with the sun coming up hard and cold from the east, painting the rock faces in a flat orange light that made everything look more permanent than it was. Her legs registered the elevation. Her lungs registered it. She ignored both. Orlov was sitting with his back against the saddle rock, his left leg extended in front of him, a field dressing that Garza had applied showing dark at the outer thigh. His rifle was 3 meters away, kicked clear. His bag was beside Garza's boot. He was looking at her when she came over the lip of the saddle. Up close, he was older than the photograph. The photograph had been maybe 2 years old, and those 2 years had taken something from him. Not mass, he was still broad through the chest and shoulders, but something around the eyes. A quality of ongoing cost that photographs didn't always capture. The scar on his jaw was exactly as she'd seen it in the image. A clean old scar, well healed, from something that had happened long before her father ever met him. She stopped 4 feet from him. They looked at each other. You adjusted off center, he said. His English was precise, accented, but clear. At 840 meters in variable wind. That was not an easy shot. No, she said. You could have killed me. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. His breathing was controlled, managing pain with discipline, the way someone trained to manage their body's responses. managed them even when the body was objecting loudly. Your father would have done the same thing, he said. She didn't answer that. Garza, she said, get him ready for movement. We need to be back to the extraction point inside 2 hours. Moving Orlov down from the saddle was ugly work. The leg wound had not hit bone or major vessel. She'd confirmed that when Garza applied the field dressing, but muscle damage at altitude with a long descent ahead of them was not a minor inconvenience. Orlov moved on his own when he could, accepted support from Garza when he couldn't, and didn't complain at any point, which was either admirable or something she didn't have a clean word for. She walked behind them and didn't talk. At the 2-hour mark, they linked up with the vehicle element that Carver had staged at the valley floor. 2 vehicles, a medical kit, and a sat phone on which Carver was already having a conversation with someone that ended when he saw the element coming down the slope. He looked at Orlov. He looked at Maya. Alive, he said. Alive, she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. The facility? Webb and Chen called it in. Demolition charge placed before they extracted. It went at 0540. Carver nodded slowly. He looked at Orlov again, at the field dressing, at the deliberate way Orlov was managing his weight, at the complete absence of anything that looked like defeat in Orlov's expression. He's going to need surgery on that leg, Carver said. I know. Then we have about 48 hours before the medical situation interferes with questioning protocol. I know, she said again. Carver looked at her steadily. You adjusted off-center deliberately. Yes. Command's authorization was capture or eliminate. Both options were available to you. Both options were available, she said. I chose one. He held her gaze. We're going to have a conversation about that, he said. I know, she said for the 3rd time. Later. She walked past him toward the vehicles. Dum! Petrov was already at the FOB's medical facility when they arrived. The shoulder wound had been serious enough to require the kind of attention the field kit couldn't fully provide, and the medevac had moved him while the element was still on the mountain. He was stable. The round had passed through without hitting anything critical, which was the specific kind of luck that didn't feel like luck in the moment, but revealed itself as such afterward. Orlov went into the medical facility under guard. Maya went to the planning room. She sat in the same chair she'd sat in when Hargrove had read her own name back to her, and she put her hands flat on the table and looked at them until they stopped doing the thing they'd been doing since she lowered the rifle. Not shaking, something more specific than shaking. A fine, high-frequency vibration that she associated with adrenaline metabolizing in muscle tissue, her body burning through what it had deployed and accounting for what was left. She'd been awake for 26 hours. She didn't sleep. Hargrove came in at 9 o'clock. He had coffee, real coffee, in 2 cups, which meant either he'd made a special effort or someone had made one for him and he'd redirected it. He set one in front of her without asking. She drank it without tasting it. He sat across from her and looked at the table for a moment before he looked at her. Carver briefed me, he said. I expected he would. The leg shot. Yes. He turned his cup in his hands. I'm not going to tell you it was the wrong tactical decision. Alive and answering questions is strategically more valuable than dead, and the intelligence Orlov can provide about the network, the cells he trained, the routes he used, the contacts, that's significant. He paused. But Carver's concern is procedural. You made a unilateral call inside an authorized lethal force mission parameter, and you made it at 800 meters in adverse conditions. If you'd missed, I didn't miss, she said. If you had, he said steadily, he walks, and everything he carries in his head about that network walks with him. He looked at her. What made you certain you wouldn't? She thought about it honestly. I wasn't certain, she said. I was confident. There's a difference. That's a fine line. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Did you adjust off center because it was the better tactical option, he said, or because of your father? She'd been asking herself the same question for the past 2 hours. Both, she said. I think both. She looked at the coffee cup. Orlov was trained by my father. He used everything my father gave him, and he built something with it that got coalition soldiers killed. That's a fact I have to live with regardless of what happens next." She paused. "But he's also the only person alive who knew my father the way a student knows a teacher. The only person who has that specific picture of who my father was." She stopped. "I don't know how to weigh that cleanly. I'm not sure it can be weighed cleanly." Hargrove looked at her for a long time. "That's the most honest answer you've given me since you sat down in this room the first time," he said. "I'm aware of that." He pushed back from the table. "Carver wants to debrief Orlov this afternoon. He wants you present." She looked up. "Present how?" "Present as the person who knows how Orlov was trained, to verify what he tells us against what you know about the methodology, to catch inconsistencies." He paused. "And because Orlov asked for you specifically, and Carver thinks that's an asset worth using." She thought about Orlov sitting against the saddle rock. "You adjusted off-center. Your father would have done the same thing." "All right," she said. "Yes." The debrief room was a converted storage space, 4 concrete walls, a folding table, 2 chairs facing one chair, a recording setup that Carver's partner Webb had assembled with the particular efficiency of someone who'd done it many times. The light was fluorescent and unflattering, and the temperature was about 3 degrees colder than it needed to be. Orlov sat in the single chair with his leg extended on a second chair Carver had added after the medic indicated that keeping the leg elevated was non-negotiable for the next several hours. He'd had surgery, local anesthetic, the FOB's medical capability stretched to its limit, and he looked like someone who'd had surgery, pale under his natural complexion, with the specific compressed quality of a person managing significant pain through will rather than medication, because the medication would have made the debrief impossible, and he'd declined it. Maya sat to Carver's left. She'd positioned the chair at a slight angle to the table so she could see Orlov's face without appearing to study it. Carver opened without preamble. "Victor Orlov, current affiliation, operational role, and reporting structure." Orlov looked at him. "You already have most of that from the facility documents," he said. "Your team was thorough. The filing system in the East Room was not destroyed in the demolition." He paused, "though I appreciate that it was a clean charge. The building was old." Carver's expression didn't change. "Confirm or correct what we have." "What do you have?" "Training cell, Eastern Provinces, 12 trainees over the past 8 months. 2 completed cycles, 2 trainees from the first cycle now active in independent operations. Affiliation with the Haqqani adjacent network operating in the corridor." 14 trainees, Orlov said. 2 cycles, yes. Affiliation is more complicated than adjacent. I was contracted, not integrated. Different thing. Contracted by whom? Orlov was quiet for a moment. "I'll answer that question," he said, "but I want something first." "You're not in a position to negotiate." "Everyone is in a position to negotiate. The positions just differ in what they have to offer." He looked at Carver without hostility, just assessment. "I want to speak to her." He looked at Maya. "For 10 minutes, before I answer anything else." Carver looked at Maya. She kept her eyes on Orlov. "About what?" "About your father," Orlov said. The room was very quiet. "That's not a precondition I'm going to," Carver started. "It's fine," Maya said. Carver looked at her. 10 minutes, she said. "I'll get more out of 10 minutes than a formal debrief structure will. You know I will." She paused. "And he knows it too. That's why he asked." Carver looked at Orlov, at Maya, at Webb, who gave him nothing. He stood up. 10 minutes, he said. He and Webb left. The recording setup stayed active. Maya knew it. Orlov almost certainly knew it. Neither of them acknowledged it. She looked at him. "You knew I was coming," she said. "You knew before the mission stepped off." The observer reported an element leaving the FOB at 0200. Standard coalition patrol does not move at 0200 with that size element. He shrugged slightly, which cost him something given the leg. And the observation post the day before, you engaged from 450 meters in the open. That is not standard infantry response. That told me someone with specific training was now in the operational area. He paused. And Ethan Varden had one student who fit that profile. "His daughter," she said, "his daughter." He looked at her carefully. You left the program. Yes. He never understood why. He said it without accusation, just as a fact being delivered. He thought he'd failed you somehow. He spent the last 2 years I was in contact with him trying to identify what he'd done wrong. She kept her face still. When was the last time you spoke to him? She said. 3 months before his death? Orlov's eyes didn't move from her face. He was not well, but he didn't tell me that. He called to ask if I'd heard from you. I hadn't. He paused. He said he wanted to apologize to you for something. He wouldn't tell me what. She looked at the table. She knew what. Her father had pushed too hard for too long, with too much certainty that what he was building in her was what she wanted. He'd been right about the skill. He'd been wrong about whether the skill being there meant it needed to be used, and wrong about whether his vision for what she could become was the same thing as her vision for who she wanted to be. And by the time he understood the difference, she'd already left, and the gap had hardened into the particular silence of two people who both thought the other one needed to move first. Neither of them had moved first. I know what it was, she said. Orlov nodded. He talked about you often, he said. In training sessions, when a student was struggling with the decision architecture, he would say, he had a phrase, that the hardest thing was not the mechanics, it was knowing when to stop. She'd heard that phrase, in her father's voice, in a different room years ago. You didn't stop, she said. It came out flat, not accusatory, Shah, just the shape of the truth. Orlov was quiet for a moment. No, he said, I didn't. He looked at his leg, at the field dressing showing below the medical wrap. Ethan taught me precision. He taught me patience. He taught me that a skilled person carries a responsibility for that skill. He paused. What he did not teach me, or what I did not learn, I am not certain which, was how to choose the right thing to be precise about. And what you built in that camp, she said, 14 trainees, 2 active in the field. What I built in that camp, he said, I can dismantle. That is the reason I am still alive and answering questions rather than dead on that ridge. She looked at him. You knew I'd adjust off center, she said. He met her eyes. I hoped, he said. I did not know. There is a difference. She sat with that for a moment. The 2 trainees currently active, she said. Where are they? He looked at her steadily. That is the question for Carver, he said. My 10 minutes are for you. He paused. I want you to understand something. What happened to Ethan? The direction I took with his tools. That is not his fault. He gave me the methodology. The application was mine. He said it without apparent emotion, but the flatness was doing work, covering something that she recognized because she'd been doing the same thing herself for 3 years. He was a good teacher. He was possibly the best teacher I ever encountered. That his student went wrong is not an indictment of the teacher. She stared at him. You've been carrying that, she said, the same way I've been carrying what I said to him before I left. He didn't answer. She sat back. Give Carver what he needs, she said. The 2 active trainees, the contact who contracted you, the roots. She paused. Everything. And in exchange, I'll tell them you cooperated from the start. She paused. Which will matter to how this ends for you. He was quiet for a moment. Fair, he said. She got up and went to the door. Cross, he said. She stopped. He was proud of you, Orlov said, for leaving. I know that sounds wrong, but he told me. He said that a person who walks away from a skill they're afraid of is braver than a person who uses the skill without asking why. He paused. He said he understood that later, after you left. She stood with her hand on the door. She didn't turn around. Give Carver what he needs, she said. She opened the door. The debrief ran for 6 hours. Orlov gave them everything. The contracted network, which was more complex than the initial intelligence assessment had suggested. The 2 active trainees, both of whom were identified and passed to coordinating elements within 4 hours of Orlov providing their last known positions. The routes through the corridor that the training network had been using to move personnel and equipment. Carver recorded all of it with the focused intensity of someone who knew the material was consequential and couldn't afford to miss anything. Maya sat through most of it. She asked 3 questions, all technical, all relating to methodology rather than operational specifics. Twice Orlov's answers veered into territory she could verify from her own knowledge of how her father taught, and both times his account matched. Not perfectly. 12 years of time and significant operational experience had layered over the original foundation, but the architecture was recognizable. Her father's architecture. At the 4-hour mark, Carver called a break. In the corridor, he stood beside her without speaking for a moment. "The 2 trainees," he said, "the coordinating element will have actionable intelligence within the next 12 hours. Good. The contracted network is larger than we assessed." He paused. Significantly larger. What Orlov built was not a training program for a single cell. It was a training program for a training program. He was building instructors. She'd understood that from the debrief. She'd watched Orlov's explanations of his methodology and recognized the structural thinking behind it, the same thinking her father had used when he designed the Grey Rock curriculum. He was building a system, she said, not a team. Yes, Ata. Carver was quiet for a moment. The intelligence value of what he's providing it's going to take months to fully exploit. He looked at her. The call you made on the saddle, the leg shot. You're going to put it in the report, she said. I have to. I know. And my report is going to say that the tactical outcome justified the deviation from mission parameters. He said it carefully. It's also going to note that the decision was made unilaterally and without communication to mission leadership. She looked at him. Rook was on comms, she said. Rook heard you say taking the shot. He did not hear you say adjusting to non-lethal targeting. Those are different things. She couldn't argue with that. What happens now, she said. For the debrief, we finish. For Orlov, he goes into the system. That's above my pay grade and above Hargrove's. He paused. For you, he stopped. Colonel Hatch wants a call, tonight. She looked at the wall. Tonight, she said. He's read the preliminary report. He wants to talk to you directly. Carver's voice shifted slightly, a small register change that she'd learned to read over the past week as his version of emphasis. He's not angry, Cross. He's making decisions about what to do with what you are. What I am, she said. What you've demonstrated you are. He paused. Which is not a supply specialist. She said nothing. Get some food, he said. Sleep if you can. The call is at 2100. He went back into the debrief room. She stood in the corridor for a minute. Then she went and found food and ate it without tasting it, sitting alone in a corner of the mess facility, her back to the wall in a position from which she could see both entrances without turning her head. Old habit. The call with Hatch at 2100 was different from the first one. The first call had been about managing a complication. This one was about something else. She could hear it in the quality of his opening, less guarded, more direct. Corporal Cross, he said, walk me through the saddle decision in your own words. She did. He listened without interrupting. The leg shot at 840 in that wind, he said when she finished. Devlin's assessment says your confidence envelope at that range was approximately 75%, meaning 1 in 4 attempts under those conditions, you miss. Under standard conditions, she said, I had current data and a fresh firing solution from the approach. 75 is your number, not mine. I'm using Devlin's. Devlin's assessment was based on 3 days of evaluation. It's conservative. A pause. You're telling me you were higher than 75, Hatch said. I'm telling you I wasn't thinking in percentages. I was thinking about the solution I had built in that moment, with those conditions at that range, and I was confident in that solution. Confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. No, sir, but they're not unrelated either. Silence. The intelligence product from Orlov's debriefing is going to have significant operational impact, Hatch said. Carver's preliminary report says we've identified a network that we weren't aware existed at this scale. 2 active trainees being actioned tonight. A contracted structure that goes up several levels from what Orlov was running. He paused. None of that exists if you make the conventional shot. I know. So tactically, the decision was correct. I believe so. But you made it in under 2 seconds without communicating it. I didn't have 2 seconds to communicate it. Another pause. No, he said. Probably not. He was quiet for a moment. Cross, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Yes, sir. What do you want to do? Not what you think I want to hear, not what sounds right for your career. What do you actually want? She'd been waiting for a version of this question for 3 years without knowing it. She thought about the armory, the smell of solvent and carbon, the M24 in her hands at 2 a.m. before the mission, the way the cold place opened when the work required it. She thought about her father. She thought about Orlov in that chair, pale and controlled, saying the hardest thing was not the mechanics. It was knowing when to stop. I want to do this correctly, she said. Not the way I've been doing it, carrying someone else's ammunition and pretending the skill isn't there. That was... She stopped. That was me running from something I should have been learning to carry. And now? Now I want to carry it properly. She paused. With the right training, the right oversight, the right structure around the decision-making so that what I decide on a saddle at 800 meters isn't just my judgment in isolation. Hatch was quiet for a moment. That, he said, is exactly the right answer. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I'm going to restructure your assignment, he said, formally. MOS reclassification, which will take some administrative time. In the interim, you stay attached to Rook's element with a secondary designation that reflects your actual capability. He paused. And I'm going to put you into an accelerated evaluation program that Carver's people run. It's not standard. It's specific to what you do and how you do it. What does that mean practically? It means more missions, more decisions, more people watching you make those decisions and weighing in afterward. He paused. It also means that the Orlov situation is not finished for you. The network he described, the people who contracted him, that investigation is going to require someone who understands the methodology at the operational level. Me, she said. You're the only person we have who can look at what Orlov built and read your father's fingerprints in it. She thought about the training graph, the progression, the architecture she'd recognized in Orlov's explanations during the debrief. All right, she said. One more thing, Hatch said. Sir, the name, Cross or Varden, that's your choice, and I don't have an opinion on it. But the record is going to reflect both, so whoever you want to be going forward, the paperwork will have the full picture. A pause. I mention it because it matters, and because nobody else is going to say it to you directly. She sat with that. Cross, she said. Maya Cross. Good, Hatch said. It wasn't agreement or approval, just acknowledgement. The way you close a decision cleanly. The call ended. She found Rook outside the ops center at 2200, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and a look on his face that said he'd been there for a while. How'd it go, he said. It went. He nodded. Petrov's stable, they're airlifting him to Bagram tomorrow for follow-on care. He paused. He wants to come back. He will, she said. Rook pushed off the wall. Hatch change your assignment? Restructured it. Meaning? Meaning I'm not carrying your ammunition anymore. He almost smiled. You were never really carrying our ammunition. Somebody had to, she said. They stood in the quiet for a moment. The FOB ran its night sounds around them. Generators, radio traffic, the distant sound of a vehicle on the perimeter road. What Orlov said to you in there, Rook said, before Carver came back in. She looked at him. I wasn't on comms, he said. I don't know what he said, but whatever it was changed the quality of your face when you came out. She thought about it. He knew my father, she said. He told me things about my father I didn't know. She paused, and some things I'd been afraid to admit I already knew. Rook was quiet. Is that going to be a problem? He said. Going forward, the Orlov connection. No, she said. And then, more honestly, I don't know, maybe. I'll deal with it. He nodded once. Get some sleep, he said. We have an element brief at 0700. He walked away. She stood for a moment in the dark outside the ops center, looking at the sky above the FOB, clear, at this elevation in a way that urban areas never were, the stars visible and dense and completely indifferent to everything happening below them. She thought about her father standing outside the Grey Rock facility on a night that had been similarly clear, telling her that patience was not the same as waiting. That patience was the active work of maintaining readiness while circumstances developed. She'd thought he was talking about shooting. He probably was. She turned and walked toward her bunk. Behind her, the FOB ran on, and somewhere in a secure medical facility 300 meters away, Viktor Orlov was lying in a bed with his leg elevated, having given away everything he'd spent 2 years building because a woman he'd never met had made a choice at 840 meters that left him alive enough to make a different one. Her father's fingerprints on a decision her father had never made. She thought about that. She kept walking. She slept for 6 hours, which was more than she expected and less than she needed, and woke up at 4:30 with the specific alertness of someone whose body had decided that was enough regardless of what the mind wanted. She lay in the dark for a few minutes, listening to the FOB breathe around her. The generators, the distant radio traffic from the night watch, someone in the next bunk turning over in their sleep with a sound like a complaint. She'd been in this bunk for 6 months. She'd spent most of those 6 months trying to be invisible, and she'd managed it almost perfectly, right up until the moment she climbed onto a rooftop and picked up a dead man's rifle. She got dressed in the dark and went to the armory. Not her armory anymore, technically. The reclassification paperwork was in process, which meant the ammunition inventory was someone else's problem now, or would be once Hargrove found someone to assign it to. But old habits didn't die on paperwork schedules, and the armory was where she went when she needed to think, and she needed to think. She didn't clean anything. She just sat on the stool in the corner with her back against the wall and let the silence do its work. Orlov had said, he was proud of you for leaving. She'd been carrying the opposite assumption for 3 years. The version of her father she'd constructed in her grief was a man she'd disappointed. A man whose silence in those last months was the silence of someone who'd given up on her. She'd built that version carefully, unconsciously, the way you build a case against yourself when you need something to explain the weight you're carrying. Orlov's version was different. It didn't let her off the hook. She'd still left without explaining properly. She'd still said things with more edge than was necessary. She'd still not called, not written, not given either of them the chance to close the gap before it became permanent. That was real. And it remained real regardless of what her father had felt about it. But the version where he'd died disappointed in her. That version Orlov had taken apart with 9 words delivered from a chair with a field dressing on his leg. He said he understood that later. After you left, she sat with that until the sky outside the ventilation window started to go gray. Then she picked up the M24 case she'd carried in with her, set it on the workbench, and opened it. She didn't have a mission. She didn't have a tasking. She had an element brief at 0700 and a reclassification in process, and a phone call from a colonel that had restructured what the next year of her life was going to look like. She just wanted to look at the rifle for a minute. She looked at it. Then she closed the case, picked it up, and walked out. Cole Vance came back to FOB Greystone 11 days after Kilo 7. He came back with his arm in a sling, a medical clearance that said light duty only, and the specific expression of a man who had been horizontal for 11 days against his preference and was done being reasonable about it. Maya was in the planning room going over map overlays with Rook when she heard the vehicle. She didn't go out. She figured Vance would find her when he was ready. He found her in about 20 minutes. He came into the planning room without knocking. He never knocked. It was a Vance characteristic that Rook had described as both his greatest flaw and his most efficient quality. And he stood in the doorway and looked at her. She looked back. Rook, to his credit, found something to do in the corner of the room that required most of his attention. "Cross," Vance said. "Sergeant." He came in, sat in the chair across the table from her. His sling was a dull green that clashed with his uniform in a way that was either coincidental or a statement. He looked at her for a long moment. "I heard what you did on the roof," he said. I heard what happened after, she said. Glad you made it. You kept the rifle clean, he said. Before the mission. I picked it up that morning and the action was… It was clean. I always kept it clean. I know. He paused. I never said thank you for that. You didn't need to. I know I didn't need to. I'm saying it anyway. He shifted slightly, adjusting the sling. 6 rounds, 4 positions. From my firing platform, with my scope settings under those conditions. Your scope was set correctly. I'd verified it 2 days before. I know you had. He looked at her. Who are you? She'd been asked that question before. By him, on the rooftop, with blood coming through his fingers. By Hargrove, in a different form. By Hatch, in a different form again. Maya Cross, she said. Shooter. Rook's element. Vance looked at her for a moment. Cross, he said. Not agreement, not disagreement, just testing the shape of it. Cross, she confirmed. He nodded slowly. The Nuristan operation, he said. I read the brief. Hatch approved it being in your briefing package? I have medical clearance for administrative review. He paused. The leg shot at 8:40. Yes. That was your call. Yes. In the moment, under pressure, without consultation. There wasn't time to consult. He looked at the table, then back at her. When I was learning, he said, I had an instructor who told me that the most dangerous shooter was the one who was good enough to be confident and not experienced enough to know what they didn't know. He paused. I spent the first 3 years of my career being that shooter. I made calls I shouldn't have made because I was good enough to get away with most of them. She waited. You're better than most of them, he said. Better than I was at your stage, probably, but the gap between what you can do mechanically and what you know about when to apply it. He stopped. That gap will close. It needs time and missions and someone in your ear who's been through the places you haven't been yet. I know, she said. I'm not criticizing the Nuristan call, he said. I'm telling you there will be a call you're not ready for, and you need to know that before it happens. She looked at him directly. Will you be the person in my ear, she said. He was quiet for a moment. When I'm back on active status, he said. Yes. She nodded. He stood up, adjusted the sling again. One more thing, he said. The rifle. On the roof. You fired 6 rounds and you didn't lose the solution once. The scope was set correctly. I know the scope was set correctly. I'm talking about the position work, the way you absorbed the recoil and came back on target. He paused. You've been cleaning that rifle for 6 months. You knew exactly how it would behave. She said nothing. That's not training, he said. That's relationship. He looked at her steadily. Take care of your equipment the way you've been taking care of mine and you'll be fine. He left. Rook, in the corner, turned around. That, he said, was the closest thing to a compliment Cole Vance has ever given anyone in this building. Don't tell him that, she said. Never, Rook agreed. 3 weeks after the Nuristan operation, Carver came back to FOB Greystone with updated intelligence and a specific request. The 2 active trainees from Orlov's program had been actioned within 48 hours of Orlov's debrief. 1 captured, 1 dead in a firefight he'd initiated when the approach element announced themselves. The contracted network above Orlov was being dismantled by coordinating elements in 2 other provinces. The intelligence product from the debrief was still being worked, still generating leads, still pulling on threads that connected to things intelligence analysts hadn't known were connected. The specific request was for Maya. She sat across from Carver in the planning room, the same chair, the same table, a setting that was beginning to feel like the place where her life kept getting redirected. There's a follow-on requirement, he said. The network above Orlov, the people who contracted him, they used a methodology for selecting and assessing candidates that we now understand came directly from your father's program materials. Not copied, adapted, systematically. He laid a document on the table. We believe Orlov wasn't the only graduate of the Grey Rock program who ended up in this network. We believe there are others. She looked at the document. How many others? She said. Unknown. That's the problem. He paused. What we need is someone who can look at a shooter's methodology, the signature of how they operate, the decisions they make, the patterns, and identify whether the foundation came from the same source. You want me to read enemy shooters, she said. I want you to help us identify which threat actors were trained in the same system your father built. He looked at her. It's not a combat role. It's analytical, looking at engagement data, incident reports, the physical evidence from shooting scenes. But it could lead to combat roles, she said. It could, he said. In some cases, probably yes. She looked at the document. 6 months ago, she had been carrying magazines across a gravel yard in the gray morning, invisible and deliberate about it, telling herself the invisibility was a choice and not a wound. She thought about what Vance had said. That gap will close. It needs time and missions. What's the timeline, but, she said. We'd want you in a different location, not a FOB situation, a working environment with access to the full intelligence architecture. He paused. It would mean leaving this element. She looked up. Rook's element, she said. Yes. She sat with that. Rook had spotted for her at 840 meters in variable wind and given her clean data and trusted her solution without qualification. Vance, who barely knew her, had come back from a medical evacuation and told her things he didn't have to tell her. Garza had run 4 minutes up a mountain slope to reach a man who'd been shooting at them an hour earlier because the mission required it. She'd been invisible for 6 months. She hadn't been invisible for the last 3 weeks. I need to talk to Rook first, she said. Of course, Carver said. Rook's response, when she told him, was to be quiet for approximately 15 seconds and then say, Good. She looked at him. Good? She said. You're better than this posting, he said. I've known that since the assessment sessions with Devlin. What you can do, the full scope of it, can't be used properly at the element level. There's a ceiling here, he paused. I'm not saying I want you gone. I'm saying what Carver's offering is the right ceiling for someone with your capability. I don't know if I'm ready, she said. You weren't ready for Kilo 7 either, he said. You did it anyway. That's not exactly reassuring. It's not meant to be reassuring. It's meant to be accurate. He looked at her. Maya, you spent 6 months being someone you aren't because you were afraid of what you were. And then circumstances removed the option of being afraid, and it turned out what you were was exactly what the situation needed. He paused. You think that was luck? Partly, she said honestly. Partly, he agreed, but only partly. She looked at the far wall. There are things I still don't know, she said. Vance said it. The gap between what I can do and what I know about when to do it. That gap exists for everyone, Rook said. The people who think it doesn't exist are the dangerous ones. He paused. You know it exists. That's already most of the work. She was quiet for a moment. If I take this, she said, the analytical role, following the network above Orlov. She stopped. It's going to require me to spend a significant amount of time inside my father's methodology, looking at what he built and tracing where it went. I know, Rook said. That's not a comfortable place to work from. No, he said. But it's your place. Nobody else has it. She nodded slowly. Tell Carver yes, Rook said, and come back when you have something worth reporting. That's it? What else do you want? She almost said something, didn't. All right, she said. She held out her hand. He shook it. His grip was firm and brief, the handshake of someone who meant what they meant and didn't embellish. Take care of your equipment, he said. She recognized Vance's phrase coming through Rook's voice, the way things pass through people in small chains. Always, she said. She visited Orlov once before she left FOB Greystone. He'd been moved to a more permanent holding facility pending the completion of his cooperation agreement with Carver's people, but he was still within range for a supervised visit that Carver approved without making a significant event of it. She went alone, in the morning, with a cup of coffee she hadn't been asked to bring and that she set on the table between them without explaining. He looked at the coffee, then at her. You're leaving, he said. How did you know? You have a different quality when you've decided something, he said. You look more like your father. She sat with that. What happens to you, she said. The cooperation agreement is extensive, he said. There will be a process. There are people above my level who have to make decisions about what the process looks like. He looked at the coffee cup. I don't expect comfort. I expect to spend a significant amount of time in rooms I did not choose, answering questions about things I did. That seems appropriate. It does, she said. But the network, what I built, it will be dismantled, he said. Completely. That is, it matters to me that it's completely, not just the cells we discussed. He looked at her. Make sure Carver understands that I will continue to cooperate on that specific objective, whatever the process looks like. I'll tell him, she said. Orlov looked at his hands, the hands of someone who'd spent decades developing precision and then applying it to the wrong ends, and who is now sitting in a room accounting for the gap between those two facts. He taught me something once, Orlov said. Your father, in a session where I had made a good shot, technically very good, all the mechanics correct, and he told me to stop and ask myself what I'd actually done. She waited. I said I'd hit the target, Orlov said. He said, yes. And what else? I didn't understand the question. He paused. He meant that every action has a radius of consequence beyond the immediate result. That precision is not just about the point of impact, it's about everything that happens after. He paused. I forgot that lesson for 12 years. You remembered it on a saddle, she said. You reminded me, he said, with a leg shot. Something that might have been a quiet acknowledgement passed between them, not warmth exactly, not forgiveness, something more honest than either. Two people who had both been shaped by the same teacher and had both failed to carry his best lesson consistently, sitting across from each other in a concrete room and not pretending otherwise. She stood up. I'll make sure Carver understands your position on complete dismantlement, she said. Thank you. She picked up her coffee cup. She'd barely touched it. She'd brought it for him and then forgotten to say that, and set it back down in front of him. That's yours, she said. She walked out. The flight out of FOB Greystone was on a logistics bird going north, cold and loud and without the amenities of anything designed for human comfort. She sat on a web seat with the M24 case between her boots and her pack on her lap and watched the ground fall away below the rear ramp. The FOB shrank to a cluster of structures inside a perimeter, then to a mark on a landscape, then to nothing distinguishable from the surrounding terrain. She'd arrived there 6 months ago carrying other people's ammunition. She was leaving carrying her own. The distinction felt significant in a way she couldn't have articulated precisely, so she didn't try. She just watched the landscape go past, the valleys and ridgelines and pale rock faces that had been her geography for 6 months, and let it recede without reaching back for it. The analytical posting was in a different province, a different kind of facility, smaller than FOB Greystone in some ways, more complex in others. A workspace with actual computers and a proper intelligence architecture and people who worked with information the way engineers worked with materials, building structures from it that could hold weight. Carver had set it up. He wasn't there full time. He moved between locations, the nature of his work requiring constant repositioning. But he'd structured the assignment carefully and briefed the facility lead on what Maya was there to do. The facility lead was a woman named Specialist Diane Okafor, which was not her actual rank but was what people called her because her actual title was too long and too classified for casual use. She was 38, Nigerian-American, with a background in linguistics and pattern analysis, and the specific quality of attention of someone who processed everything she observed and filed it without apparent effort. She met Maya at the door with a handshake that was precise without being performative. Cross, she said. Carver briefed me. Come in. Maya came in. The workspace was a long room with map walls and workstations and the smell of coffee and the particular density of concentrated work. 4 other analysts at workstations, none of whom looked up immediately. Your area is here, Okafor said, indicating a workstation at the end. The Grey Rock adjacent incident files are loaded. You start with the last 18 months of precision engagement reports from the Eastern Corridor. Anything with a methodology signature that matches the parameters Carver outlined. Maya sat down, looked at the screen. I want to flag something before I start, she said. Okafor looked at her. My analysis is going to be subjective in some areas, she said. I'm reading for signatures I recognize from personal experience with the source methodology. That means my assessments will need independent verification before they're actioned. Carver told me, Okafor said. You self-report confidence levels and flag personal connection material. Everything gets double-checked before it moves forward. She paused. Does that work for you? Yes, Maya said. That works. Okafor nodded once and went back to her own workstation. Maya looked at the screen. The first incident report was dated 7 months ago. Precision engagement, Eastern Corridor, single shot, significant distance, one target. The report had a section on methodology indicators that the original analysis team had noted without being able to interpret fully. She read it. She read the methodology section twice. Then she pulled out a notebook, a physical notebook, paper, her father's preference and therefore hers, and started writing. The handwriting was her own. The structure of the notes was her father's. The analysis sitting behind it was built from 3 years of trying to forget she knew how to do this, and 6 months of carrying other people's ammunition, and 11 days of being assessed on a range, and one operation in the mountains of Nuristan where a decision made in 2 seconds had turned out to be the kind of decision that mattered. She wrote for 3 hours without stopping. Months passed, not easily, not smoothly. Work of this kind didn't have the clean narrative of a mission with a beginning and an end. It had days that produced nothing, and days that produced a single thread worth pulling, and occasionally a day that opened into something larger and changed the picture significantly. The network above Orlov was large. Dismantling it took coordinated effort across multiple elements in multiple provinces, with Maya's analysis feeding into a broader picture she could only see partially from her workstation. That was fine. She'd learned to work with partial pictures. She wrote reports that Okafor reviewed and Carver actioned. She flagged her confidence levels honestly, including the cases where her personal connection to the methodology made her assessment suspect and required more weight of independent verification. She got some things wrong and identified them when she did. She got more things right. Vance came through the facility once, 6 months into her posting there, on his way to a different assignment. He stopped in the workspace for 40 minutes, looked at her notes, asked 3 specific questions about her analytical methodology, and said, "The gap is closing." She didn't ask him to elaborate. She didn't need to. The last time she saw Orlov was in a formal review hearing, 8 months after FOB Greystone. He'd been moved through the process he'd described, rooms he didn't choose, questions about things he'd done, and the cooperation agreement had held. He'd been consistent, thorough, and accurate in every respect that could be independently verified. He looked thinner. Not damaged, just reduced. Like a person who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally put it down, and the body was still adjusting to the new weight distribution. Maya was present at the hearing as a technical consultant, not as a principal. She sat along the wall with Carver and 2 other analysts and answered specific questions when asked. At one point, the hearing officer asked Orlov directly, "Do you have anything you want to say about the operational situation that led to your capture?" Orlov was quiet for a moment. He looked at Maya. "The person who captured me," he said, "made a choice that I did not expect, and that I did not deserve. I have spent several months thinking about that choice and what it meant." He looked at the hearing officer. "The choice was consistent with the teaching that I was given and failed to apply. I don't believe it was made for my benefit. I believe it was made because it was correct." He paused. "I would like that to be on the record." The hearing officer noted it. Maya looked at the wall. She went to her father's grave 7 months after that. It was a small cemetery in a town in Colorado she'd avoided for 4 years. The drive from the airport took 40 minutes, and she made it in a rental car with the radio off, watching the familiar landscape come back the way landscapes come back, when you've been away long enough to have half forgotten them, and then they're suddenly exactly as you left them. The grave was simple. Her father had been a specific man in many ways, but about his own memorial he'd been clear: stone, name, dates. Nothing else. He'd said once that a headstone that said too much was a headstone that didn't trust the person to speak for themselves. She stood in front of it for a while, not speaking, not performing anything, just standing there with the Colorado wind coming across the open ground and the sun at a low angle that made the stone look warm. She'd carried guilt here for 4 years. The specific heavy guilt of things left unsaid, of gaps left unfilled, of the last conversation being the wrong one. She wasn't putting the guilt down. It didn't work that way. The guilt was structural now. Part of how she understood the choices she'd made and the choices she was making and the weight of what it meant to have a skill and to apply it with care. What she was putting down was the version of her father she'd constructed from the guilt. The disappointed one. The one who'd died with the gap intact and hadn't understood why she'd left. Orlov had given her a different version. It wasn't a comfortable version. The new version still contained a man who'd pushed too hard and assumed too much, and hadn't left enough space for his daughter to be someone different than what he'd envisioned. That was real, and it remained real. But it also contained a man who'd said to a student in a training session about a daughter who'd walked out of his facility that he understood. That a person who walks away from a skill they're afraid of is braver than one who uses the skill without asking why. He'd understood. She'd just needed someone who'd been there to tell her. "I'm doing it correctly now," she said. The wind came across the ground. She stood for a while longer. Then she got back in the rental car and drove to the airport. A year after Kilo 7, Maya Cross stood in front of 14 soldiers in a room that smelled like gun oil and dry erase markers, holding a rifle she'd carried for 12 months through 2 postings and more decisions than she'd started the year knowing how to make. The soldiers were young, not inexperienced. Most of them had operational backgrounds, had been in firefights, had made decisions under pressure, but they were at the beginning of a specific kind of training that was different from what they'd done before, and she could see it in the way they were sitting, the combination of confidence and uncertainty that characterized people who were good at something and had just been introduced to a new dimension of what good actually required. She set the rifle down on the table in front of her. She didn't start with mechanics. Carver had suggested she start with mechanics. Okafor had suggested she start with the history of the program. Vance, in a brief message, had suggested she start with whatever felt right. She started with a question. "How many of you," she said, "have taken a shot you were certain about and found out afterward it was wrong?" Hands went up, most of them. "How many of you," she said, "have not taken a shot you were certain about and found out afterward it would have been right?" Fewer hands, but hands. "The gap between those two experiences," she said, "is where we're going to work. Not the mechanics, not the platforms, or the ballistics, or the environmental factors. Those are the foundation. You need to have them, and we'll review them. But what we're here to build is the decision architecture that sits on top of the foundation." She paused. "The question isn't whether you can make the shot. You can. Most of you can make the shot. The question is whether you should, and when, and what happens in the space between identifying a target and pressing a trigger." The room was quiet. "That space," she said, "is where people live or die, including you, including the people you're trying to protect. And it is not a space that can be navigated by mechanics alone." She picked the rifle back up. Not to demonstrate anything, just to hold it, the weight of it familiar in her hands. "My father told me once that the hardest shot is not the one you can make," she said. "It's the one you choose not to take." She set the rifle down again. "We're going to spend the next several weeks learning the difference," she said. "And I'm going to be honest with you. There will be cases where the difference is not clear, where you have 2 seconds and imperfect information and a decision that matters beyond what you can fully understand in the moment." She looked at them steadily. "In those cases, your training is what you have. Your judgment is what you have. And the structure of how you've learned to think, that structure is what we're building here." Nobody moved. "We start Monday," she said. "Until then, I want each of you to write 200 words on a decision you made under pressure that you'd make differently now. Not a mistake, a decision. There's a difference." She paused. "I'll write one too." She picked up the rifle case, closed it, and walked out. Behind her, she heard the room stir. The sound of people beginning to process something that would take longer than a room's worth of time to fully understand. She kept walking. In the hallway, she stopped for a moment. She thought about a rooftop in Kandahar, a rifle lying beside a wounded man, 4 meters of exposed ground, and a choice that had taken 2 seconds to make and had taken the better part of a year to understand. She thought about Orlov on the saddle, his palm facing outward. She thought about her father's handwriting on a targeting chart. She thought about what it meant to carry a skill honestly, not as a weapon and not as a burden, but as a responsibility that required constant, imperfect human renegotiation. She started walking again. The hallway was long and the light was flat and ordinary, the kind of light that didn't know anything about what passed through it. She walked through it anyway, because the hardest thing was never the shot you could make. It was understanding, clearly and without comfort, why some things were worth saving, and having the discipline in the 2 seconds you were given to act on that understanding instead of just your ability. That was the lesson. That was the only one that mattered.